Dzień dobry
Speaking.
Państwu.
All right,
Witam
good morning, ladies
bardzo
and
Państwa serdecznie.
gentlemen.
Trochę się zaczytałem. Witam
Let
Państwa
me
serdecznie
welcome
na
you very
webinarze Instytutu
warmly
Badań Edukacyjnych
to the
realizowanym w
webinar
ramach
of
naszych cyklu
Educational
działań
Research Institute.
związanych z pracami
It
nad
is
profilem
part
absolwenta
of
szkoły
our
podstawowej i
work,
przedszkola.
which is focused
Dzisiaj
on the
będziemy rozmawiali
profile
o
of a graduate
przyjemności
of
czytania,
primary
o tym,
school,
w jaki sposób możemy
kindergarten. We are
sprawić,
going
żeby
to talk about
dzieci
the pleasure
traktowały
of
czytelnictwo
reading.
jako
How
przyjemność
can we do that
i o tym,
actually, that
jakie
children
wnioski
treat
dla tego tematu płyną z
reading as
badań
a pleasure,
zagranicznych, międzynarodowych, w
and
jaki
what
sposób
kind
można
of
z tego skorzystać
research has
w
been
Polsce.
conducted
No
into
ale
it abroad, and
poproszę
what
pana
conclusions we
dyrektora,
can take advantage of
doktora
in
Tomasza
Poland.
Gajderowicza,
Let me now
wicedyrektora
ask
Instytutu Badań
Dr.
Edukacyjnych,
Tomasz
o to, żeby
Gajderowicz,
otworzył
Deputy
dzisiejsze wydarzenie i
Director of
powiedział
Educational
dwa
Research
słowa
Institute, to open
tych
this
zmian,
webinar
proszę
and
bardzo.
to make an introduction.
Bardzo dziękuję. Bardzo
Thank
się
you very
cieszę
much
z powodu
indeed.
tego
I
seminarium,
am very
ponieważ
glad we are
rozmowa na
meeting
temat
here
przyszłości edukacji
today.
to jest
I
rozmowa, która
believe a
powinna opierać się
conversation
zawsze
about
na
the future
badaniach,
of
na tym, co
education should
naprawdę
be
wiemy,
always
o tym,
based
w jaki
on
sposób można
studies, on what
uczyć,
we
w jaki
really
sposób
know,
można też
on how
stymulować
to
różne
teach and
rzeczy wokół tego
stimulate
uczenia się.
certain
Wiemy,
things
że są to
around
umiejętności
teaching,
zakres,
because we
umienie
know that a
czytanego tekstu
skill of
jest
reading and
mierzalny. To
understanding
są
a
te rzeczy, które
written
dotyczą
text
tego, czy
is
faktycznie ktoś
measurable,
sięgnie po
but
książkę,
whether
żeby
someone is
przeczytać ją w
going to
wolnym czasie,
start
to
reading for
zupełnie inna
pleasure in their
kwestia.
free time, that's a separate
Wiemy,
issue.
jak ważny też temat jest
We
czytelnictwa w
know
dzisiejszych czasach.
that
Rozwój mediów
reading
społecznościowych
is
tak
so
naprawdę
important
sprawił,
nowadays
że
because we have the
mniejszył się
social
bardzo tak zwana
media
attention
and
span,
it
czyli
was
jakby nasza
translated
koncentracja
into
uwagi.
narrower
Przestaliśmy
attention
czytać
span.
dłuższe teksty i
So we stopped
przestaliśmy
reading
lubić
longer
dłuższe teksty.
texts
Z
and
drugiej
we no
strony
longer
wiemy,
enjoy
że
reading
umiejętność
longer
czytania
texts. On the other hand, we
pogłębionego,
know
dłuższych tekstów
that
ma swoją
a skill
ogromną
of
wartość
reading
dla każdego człowieka.
longer,
I w
deeper
kontekście
texts is so
tych zmian i w
valuable
kontekście
in this
wyników
context
polskich
and
uczniów, w
in the
kontekście
context of
wielkich
the
wyzwań, które
results
stoją
of
przed
Polish
polskim
students,
systemem
in the
oświaty,
context of
który,
great
jak Państwo
challenges for
wiedzą,
the
niestety
Polish
w wersji
educational
narodowej
system,
powiesiło to
because you
zadanie
know that the
opiekę i pracę
ministry
już nie
uh,
tylko nad profilem
ordered us
absolwenta szkoły
actually or
podstawowej czy też
commissioned us
persona
with a
uczniów
work
szkoły, ale
over
też
the
nad
profile
przygotowaniem
of a
samych
graduate of a
podstaw
school,
programowych i
and
tych
also we are
okolicznych
working on the core
zmian, które do
curriculum.
oświaty wejdą w
So there are so
2026
many
roku. To jest
changes
wielkie wyzwanie.
which will be
Po raz
actually
pierwszy w historii
introduced into
naszego
the
kraju
system of
chcielibyśmy, żeby oparły
education
się te
starting
rozwiązania nie na
2026.
sentymentach
And
politycznych,
we
tylko
want
na
to
tym, co jest
base
w
these
nas zapisanym w
solutions not
badaniach
on
edukacyjnych,
sentiments of
w badaniach
politicians, but
edukacyjnych.
on
Dlatego dzisiaj
research,
mamy tą
educational
wielki
research.
zaszczyt gościć
That is why
przyjemność,
we have this great
gościć
pleasure, but
najlepszych
also
ekspertów w
honor
obszarze
to have great
czytania,
experts
ze
on
zrozumieniem
reading
w
with
obszarze
us,
zrozumienia
on
czytanego tekstu, w obszarze przyjemności w czytania,
reading
żeby
comprehension,
przybliżyli
but
nam
also
wyniki badań
reading
dotyczące
for
tego, jak
pleasure. And they
przyjemność
will tell us
czytelnictwa
about the
pozwala się
results of
faktycznie uczyć się
research
czytelnictwa i
on how the
zrozumienia
pleasure
czytanego
of
tekstu.
reading is then
Wiemy
translated into
ogólnie z badań
uh,
tych międzynarodowych
reading
porównawczych,
longer,
badań
more
QUERES, to
complicated
jest
texts.
badanie,
And we
które działa
know
w
on the
klasach
basis
czwartych,
of various
badania
kinds
PISA,
of
czyli
research,
badania,
like
w którym
PISA,
rozumienie czytanego tekstu
where
mierzone jest wśród 15-latków,
reading
że
comprehension
polscy
is
uczniowie nie
measured
wypadają
among
tak źle. Ich
15-year-olds,
wyniki
that Polish
rozumienia
pupils
czytanego
and
tekstu w klasze
students
czwartej
fare quite
plasują
well,
się wśród
and they
czołówki w
are
Europie.
somewhere at the
Natomiast w
top
badaniu PISA
um,
również wypadamy
in
nieźle, chociaż
Europe.
od
So,
2018 roku
well, basically, since
zanotowaliśmy dosyć
2018, we
druzgocący
have
spadek.
noticed a
Ale jeżeli
certain
chodzi o te
decline.
kwestie
But
związane
as for
stosunkiem
matters
do czytania,
connected
czytania
with
dla
our
przyjemności, to nigdy
attitude
nie
towards
byliśmy
reading,
nawet w
reading
czołówce.
for
Dzisiaj
pleasure,
tutaj
we were
mamy
never
wielkie
at the
wyzwania
top of
przed
these
nami.
rankings. There are
Dlatego tym
huge
bardziej się
challenges
cieszę, że
ahead of
dzisiaj
us.
będziemy
So
mogli
I'm
o tym
very much
porozmawiać i
pleased that
posłuchać
we can have
głosu
this
topowych
conversation.
ekspertów,
We can
zarówno z
listen
polskiej,
to
jak i z
top
zagranicy.
experts from
Naprawdę tego typu
Poland and
seminaria
abroad.
są podstawą dla
Seminars like that
reformowania
are
oświaty.
so
Bardzo dziękuję,
important
że to się
for
w Polsce
reforming
odbywa.
education
Bardzo Państwu
later
dziękuję
on.
i z
So
ekscytacją
thank you very
czekam na
much
to
for
dzisiejsze
joining
spotkanie.
us. I'm very excited to
Dziękujemy
open
panie
this
dyrektorze za
webinar.
otwarcie.
Thank you,
Proszę
Director, for
państwa,
opening our
informacja
webinar.
organizacyjno-techniczna.
Organizational
Część
information.
prezentacji będzie w języku
Some
angielskim. Jeżeli
presentations will
państwo
be delivered in
potrzebujecie tłumaczenia
English.
na
If you
język
need
polski, możecie
interpretation
włączyć
into
takie
Polish,
tłumaczenie
you have
używając
to find
ikony
the Polish
krokosu
channel.
na
There is a
dole
globe,
ekranu.
the icon
Tam
of the
można sobie
globe at
wybrać
the
kanał
bottom
polski
of
lub
the screen.
angielski.
Then
Dear
select
participants, if you
Polish
would like
or
to, if you
English,
wish to hear
depending on the
presentations
language
given
that you
in
need to
Polish
listen to.
in English, you can choose the
The
channel
same
formatted
information in English.
into English down on the screen
W tym
using the
momencie te
globe
osoby,
icon.
które wybrały
So
język
if
polski,
you wish
powinny
to, please
słyszeć
do so.
tłumaczenie na
I
język
will now switch to
polski. To jest
Polish.
ta sama informacja, która
Proszę
przed chwilą była przekazana po angielsku.
kilka bardzo
All right, ladies and
interesujących
gentlemen, now we are going to
prezentacji.
listen to several
Pani Maria
interesting
Deskur, prezes
presentations.
Zarządu Fundacji
Maria
Powszechnego Czytania,
Deskur, president
opowie
of
nam
the
o
Foundation
czytającej się
of
szkole
Universal
jako
Reading, will
warunku
tell us
równych
about
szans
reading
dla
school
każdego dziecka.
as
Następnie
a
pani
condition for equal
David,
opportunities for every
ekspertka
child.
z
Then
brytyjskiej
Alison David, an expert
odnogi wydawnictwa Egmont,
from
opowie
Egmont
nam o
UK
wynikach
branch, will tell us about
badań
the
dotyczących
results
czytania dla przyjemności dzieci
of
w
the
Wielkiej Brytanii.
research on
Po niej pani Monika
reading for
Pochanke-Smith,
pleasure
profesor
among
francuskiego
children in the United Kingdom. Then
powie
Monika
nam parę słów na
Pochanke-Smith,
temat
a teacher of American School of
zrównoważonych
Warsaw, will
umiejętności
tell us
człowieku.
more
Jeśli
about
tak mogę
balanced
przetłumaczyć termin
literacy.
balans
There was a
literacy.
rough translation
Primary
of
grades as a
balanced
mode of
literacy
teaching
into
reading and
Polish.
writing.
So it will be about balanced
Po
literacy in
przerwie,
primary
krótkiej
grades
przerwie, którą
as a
myślę,
model
że
of teaching
wszyscy
reading and
spędzimy
writing.
blisko
Then there will be a
butelki
short
wody,
break.
będziemy
We'll
kontynuowali
have a sip
wystąpieniem
of water,
pani
coffee, or
dr Joanny
something, and
Dobkowskiej z
then we'll listen
Uniwersytetu
to a
Warszawskiego
presentation of Dr. Joanna
na temat
Dobkowska from the
metody
University of
Balanced
Warsaw,
Literacy
and she
i
will
jej
tell us
adaptacji.
more
Poznajcie
about
przynajmniej tę metodę do
balanced
polskiego
literacy
czytania.
method and how it is
I
adapted to
zakończymy
Polish teaching
prezentacją
of
dr
reading.
Kingi
And the last
Białek
presentation will be by Dr. Kinga Białek. She
dotyczącą
will talk about
towarzyszeniu uczniom w odnajdywaniu relacji z
the
tekstem
following:
literatury.
how to accompany
Teraz
students
poproszę
in
właśnie
their
panią Marię
search for
Deskur,
finding
prezes
relations
Zarządu Fundacji Powszechnego
with
Czytania, która jest przy
texts on
okazji
culture and how
współorganizatorem
emotions are
dzisiejszego
involved in
webinaru.
that. And
Oto, żeby
now I will
przeszła
give the mic
czy
to
przeprowadziła
Maria
nas przez
Deskur,
tematy
and she
związane
will tell
z
us more about
równymi szansami dla
equal
dzieci i poprawciami
opportunities for
w
every child
czytelnictwie.
on the
A powiem tylko, że
basis
pani
of
Maria
reading
jest
opportunities. Let me just tell you
współzałożycielką
that Maria is
wydawnictwa
a
oraz
co-founder
autorką
of the
poradnika
publishing house
upoważnienia
called
czytania, słuchania
Muhomor,
książek,
and she
szefową
is
wydawnictwa Słowne
promoting
i
reading,
kolekcji Burza
and
Polska. Jest też rowerzystką,
she is also
także
an avid cyclist.
zapraszamy do
So
takiego
I believe
dynamicznego, bo przy tej dzisiejszej
it
pogodzie
will
dość
be a very
piekielnej w Polsce
dynamic
potrzebujemy troszkę
presentation. We have
dynamiki.
plenty of
O
clouds
przeprowadzenie
and
nas
rainy,
przez
foggy weather
zagadnienie
in
Pani Mario.
Poland. So
Zapraszamy.
let us begin the presentation.
Dzień
Maria,
dobry.
over to you. Good
Myślę, że
morning, everyone.
widzimy
I
mój
believe we
ekran,
can,
taką
or
mam
everyone can
nadzieję.
see my
Tak, jest,
slides.
widzimy. Na razie
Yes,
widzimy
we
tryb
can see
roboczy.
the
Proszę
Tak, ja
slides.
się
wysłuchać.
troszeczkę
I'm
boję
changing
włączyć
the mode
tryb
because now, yes, I
pełnoekranowy.
know
Może
I
to
should
zadziałać, ale
switch to full
spróbujmy.
screen mode. Oh,
Zadziała.
let me give it a try. That's
Zadziałało,
okay.
zobaczymy,
We
czy
can
właśnie tu
see it
się
in full screen
klika.
mode.
Kliknąć.
Everything
Nawet
is
się klika.
or seems to be fine.
Udało
Yeah.
się. Dobrze, więc ja
All right then.
faktycznie bym
So
opowiedziała
perhaps
ciut
I could tell
o
you a
tych
little
równych
bit
szansach,
about
które
equal
postrzegamy
opportunities
w czytaniu, czy dzięki
and how
czytaniom.
it is
To, co
related to
powiem, jest w dużej
reading.
mierze,
And what I will tell
mm,
you to a large
powiedzmy,
extent
takim skrótem refleksji,
is
które zawarłyśmy
a
razem z
certain
Joanną
summary
i
of
z
certain
Kingą Białek, której dzisiaj będę się
reflections
wypowiadać, oraz
that
innymi
we
ekspertami
have written
w
down
takiej
with
publikacji.
Mrs.
Ona zresztą
Dobkowska
zostanie na
and
naszej
Mrs.
stronie.
Białek, and we
Pokazuję tutaj
are
dziś jest
co-authors of a
referencując te
certain
zdjęcia, bo myśmy w
publication
zeszłym
that is
tygodniu
available on
otrzymali
the
tę
website. You
nagrodę
can see some photos
Biblioteki
because last week
Kongresu
we
i
received Congress
zasadniczo
Library
dokładnie
Awards.
za
So
dostrzeganie
it was
właśnie
the Literacy
tych
Award winner
potrzeb
of
różnych
the awards
społeczności
issued by the
czytania,
Library of
czytania
Congress. So
za
basically, it was
różnorakie
about
podejście, więc to jest takie nawet troszkę a
the
propos,
research on
wobec tego, że
reading
jest to
literacy. So
jakiś PR naszej
yes, of course,
organizacji.
it is part of the PR of our
I
organization as well. I'm
przechodząc
showing you
już
the
do
photos and the award.
rzeczy,
So let me move on to the
ym,
essence of my presentation.
przepraszam, zastanawiam się, czy tak, dobrze.
I'm thinking whether that's
Jest
the right
oczywiście
slide. Yes, it is.
wiele
So
powodów, dla których
there are
powinniśmy
so many
chcieć
reasons for
to
which
czytanie budować
we would
i
like
jakby
to
ja raczej
promote
przyzwyczajając się,
reading.
wyjdę
And
w to,
usually,
co
before
robić,
I
to jednak odczuwam potrzebę,
start
żeby
saying what
troszeczkę
needs
powiedzieć
to
o
be
tym,
done, I feel I
dlaczego
need
to
to
jest
say
istotne.
why.
Więc to jest
Why it is
istotne ze względu
significant.
na
It is significant,
nas
it
jako
is
też dziecka,
important
co jest
because we
banalne do
want
powiedzenia,
a
ale sobie
child
tak to
to be
powiedzmy.
successful. I
I to
know
jest
it
jakiś
sounds
rodzaj
like a cliche,
supremocii
but it is
nawyku, który nigdy nie
important.
będzie
It is like a
wyliczony
superpower.
po
It is
prostu
like a
słynny
habit. And you can see
powstający lat
some
80.
calculations from the end of the
Prostego
1980s.
nawyku,
A very
wcale
simple
nie
habit
3 godzin czytania dziennie,
You
tylko
don't need to read for 3 hours
tylko
every day.
prostej, krótkiej
You
zabawy.
can start from something very
Drugą
simple,
rzeczą, którą
much
my
shorter.
mocno potrzebujemy
Then,
podkreślić, to jest to,
secondly, we need to
że ta
emphasize
przyjemność, o której
that
dzisiaj
the
mówimy,
pleasure of
ona
reading that we are
buduje
discussing today
równość dzieci.
is building
Poprzez przyjemność,
equality
poprzez to, że
among
nauczymy
children
dzieci
through
czytać w
pleasure,
sposób
through
nie nauczymy,
enjoyment,
a zaprosimy dzieci do
to
czytania
which
dla
we invite
przyjemności.
children, we invite them, we encourage them to read for
Będziemy w
pleasure,
stanie
and thanks to
zbudować
that,
ich
we'll be able to build
uczestnictwo
the
i ich
participation,
podmiotowość,
the
ale przede wszystkim o
engagement,
przyjemności.
and
Ja
it
nawet użyłam
begins
to
with
słowo
pleasure, it begins
super
with
moc fajna.
enjoyment. I was calling it
No i
at
teraz
one
jakby w
point a
kontekście
superpower of
edukacji,
having fun.
systemu edukacji,
In the
oczywiście
context of education,
myślę, że można sobie
I
dopowiedzieć, że my
think we
w ten
can
sposób
say
jakby
very
pomagając
safely
dzieciom w
that
czytaniu,
helping
budujemy
children in
gospodarkę.
reading
Ja
skills,
wyświetlam
we are
tutaj
contributing to the economy
10
actually.
kompetencji
I'm showing
przyszłości,
10
które
competences
wyróżniło
of the
World Economic
future
Forum.
defined by the World
No
Economic
i 8
Forum,
z nich
and 8 out of them
buduje czytanie.
are built by reading.
Natomiast
And
w kontekście na przykład
in the
wystąpienia
context
ministry edukacji
of the
Barbary
speech
Nowackiej
by
na
Minister of
konferencji
Education
EFNI, gdzie ona
Barbara
mówiła
Nowacka
o
at the
tych
EFNI
powiedzmy
conference,
takich
where she
silosach
was talking
myślenia
about
o przyszłości,
Silas kind
właśnie
of thinking
takiego
about the
segmenta, czyli
future, of the profile
logiczne
of a
myślenie,
graduate, like
kreatywność, praca
logical
zespołowa i
thinking,
sprawczość,
teamwork,
jeżeli się nie
agency,
pomyliłam w moich notatkach, no to wszystkie te rzeczy
all these
absolutnie
things,
tak
all
wchodzą
these
do czytania. Więc
skills
ja
are built by reading as well.
tutaj z przyjemnością się
So
jakby podpinam pod to, że
I very much
zespół
confirm this
musi
view. I actually
takie 4
subscribe to that,
silosy jakby
that the
celowe
ministry
widzi
sees
i bardzo
all
mocno
these
chciałam dostrzec,
skills. And I wanted
że
to
właśnie czytanie
emphasize
jest fundamentem dla każdego
that
rozwoju, dla
reading is
wszystkich
fundamental for
nich.
developing all these
I
skills actually.
takim ostatnim slajdem
And the last
o
slide
tym, dlaczego my to w ogóle
about
robimy,
why we actually do what
jest
we do
pokazanie tego bardzo
is the
holistycznego
slide showing
podejścia.
this very holistic
Czytanie
approach.
jakby przesiąka,
Reading
że tak się wyrażę, całe nasze życie,
permeates
w którymkolwiek
all the aspects of our
silosie,
lives, regardless of the
departamencie
silo,
czy
or
systemie
regardless of the
współczesności
section
się
or
znajdziemy.
parts of the
Także,
contemporary
no tak jak
worlds.
szczerze powiedziawszy, nawet już na
So,
poprzednim seminarium o tym
during the previous
rozmawialiśmy,
seminar, we had a
my jakby
kind of
nie
conversation
próbujemy
about that, a
powiedzieć, że
shorter
szkoła ma cały
conversation.
ten temat
So we are
załatwić. W
not
ogóle
trying to
uważamy,
say
że
that it is
my
only
gdzieś
up
jako
to
organizacja
school. We, as the
wyższająca Polskę,
organization,
jesteśmy
we as
zrzeszeniem
Reading
wielu
Poland, which is
organizacji.
an association
Uważamy,
of
że
various
interesariusze
organizations,
jest
we
dużo więcej
believe
i że
that there are so many
tak
stakeholders in
naprawdę
this
wszystkie ręce
process.
na pokład
And
powinniśmy
all
wszyscy
hands on
wprowadzać
board, it should be this
i
approach.
próbujemy
We should
angażować,
do
jeśli
it like
chodzi
that.
o
We are
działania
trying to
zdrowia i
involve
przede wszystkim
milieux from the
społeczeństwa,
health sector,
rozwoju
from
regionalnego i tak dalej.
regional
I
development, and there are
teraz
so many stakeholders that should be
przechodząc już
interested
jakby
in that.
bardziej do
And let
tego,
me move on to
jak to zrobić, tak? Nie
how we
dlaczego
should
to jest
go
takie
about that.
istotne.
Not only why, but also
To
how.
jest slajd, który ja zasadniczo
It
też
is a slide
pokazywałam na
that I have
ostatnim
shown
seminarium
at the last
poprzednim.
seminar,
I
the
myślę, że on
previous one,
jednak
and I
uważam
believe
się go pokazać drugi raz, bo
that
myślę, że to jest
I'm
jakiś
showing
sposób
it
bardzo
once
kluczowy.
again
Że
because it
my
is quite significant. It
mamy
is quite
takie nawyki
important.
myślenia
We have certain habits of
i
thinking,
potrzebujemy w jakiś
and we
sposób
need
otworzyć się
to open
na
up
powiedzmy
to
myślenie powiedzmy nowocześniejsze, tak?
in a more
Czyli
modern
to,
way.
że
Maybe
naszym
I
celem
should
nagle
put it like
powinno
that.
liczyć na
So
to, żeby
our
dzieci
goal
lubiły czytać.
should be for
Czyli
children to
nie to,
like
że
reading,
one
to
mają
enjoy reading.
doskonale potrafić czytać,
So
tylko
they
powinniśmy się
don't have to be
skoncentrować na tym, że powinny
perfect at the
lubić
skill of
czytać.
reading. We should be
No i
focused
pytanie jest, jak to
on
zrobić, tak?
children
Drugim
enjoying the
elementem
process
jest
of
to,
reading.
żebyśmy gdzieś sobie
Another
uświadomili, że
element
tak
is
jak to przed
that,
chwilką pokazałam,
as I have just
że to czytanie
shown,
nie jest
that
po to, żeby
reading is
oni,
not
dzieci,
for them, for
przeczytali jakieś
children,
książki, które
to
my
read
im
certain
każemy
specific
jako
titles
zaproszenie,
of books that we order them to read,
podsuniemy, czy prawda,
or
powiemy,
that
że
we
mają czytać
suggest, or that we
i że w
say,
dodatku
oh, you should read that.
być może gdzieś w jakiś sposób funkcjonuje takie
Maybe,
myślenie,
in a
że
way,
czytają po to, żeby przeczytać te
some
lektury,
people
żeby być,
think,
no nie
oh,
wiem,
they need to
patriotami
read these
gościńcy albo
specific
wyspin, czy jakiś
these specific books
Kaszubski.
because
A
we
więc
want them to be
my trochę mówimy,
patriots,
no troszkę
Polish,
oderwijmy się od
European.
takiego
No, we
myślenia
have
i
to
powiedzmy
move
sobie, że
away from
dzieci
this
czytają
mentality, from this
po to,
way of
żeby po
thinking.
prostu
Let us say that
się
children
rozwijać i
read
żeby być
to
szczęśliwymi
develop,
ludźmi,
to
żeby
be
być
happy
szczęśliwymi,
people,
szczęśliwymi
to be
zawodowo.
people who are
No i na
satisfied and
przykład,
fulfilled professionally as
żeby
well.
sobie mogli studiować
so that they can study sciences because math develops brains and so on. And reading also develops brains. So the third element, we are like creating the subjectivity, that they are like a subject, not an object, that are subject, like a civic person. We are shaping them, obviously, that's clear. There is no anarchy in what I'm saying. Yes, we are shaping them, but let us also think about students' right to read. Not only duty, but the right to read, the right to choose their own books and titles, the right to choose their own ways in life. What is the foundation? The fact that the child started to enjoy reading, to find a pleasure of reading, and then she or he, they can do it. Let me go back to the publication that I have mentioned. I'm checking the time. I still have a few more minutes. So we're trying to come up with certain ideas. So reading supports education. First of all, we are trying to show a broader picture, to show that reading really supports education in so many dimensions. Because thanks to reading, children have more educational opportunities. It also supports stable psychological, mental, physical development. Please read this brochure, read this publication. There is more information about that. It supports economic independence and competences of the future. And reading supports community approach because it builds cultural identity, openness to others. So we are moving away from the idea of forcing children specific books. But we are not saying our cultural identity is not important. Obviously it is. But when we give children the space so that we can think, oh, let's invite children to reading because it is pleasant. Thanks to changing this mentality, the children will read on a regular basis, and then they will be able to read easily books which they find difficult to read at the moment. And then we are showing equal opportunities or more equal opportunities thanks to reading. And there is an idea that we are trying to promote in this brochure, in this leaflet. This idea is a vision that a school perhaps from the very beginning could analyze children's competences because children, when they come to school, have very different levels of competences depending on their homes, actually. That's the reality that we face. I don't need to explain it further to you, I guess. It is quite obvious to our participants, I think. So if we can capture this moment or capture dyslexia or some competence shortage resulting from a shortage of books at homes, because in Poland 30% of households do not have any books there. So there are children from homes like that. If we can address that issue very soon from the beginning of the educational educational path, and if we can help them catch up, it would be brilliant because we would come up with a system where these children would have better chances, better opportunities, and so many things would be much simpler than different methods of reading, of teaching reading. It is up to Joanna Dobkowska. She will elaborate on that. And Kinga Białek in our brochure writes about a reading ecosystem. I think Kinga later on will refer to that. So in a nutshell, it is about availability of books, so easy access to books and reading people in the vicinity of children. And then it is translated into the system in which reading is natural, like breathing the air or like life. That's a vision that shows in a very clear way what can be achieved?
Piszemy też o współpracy
We
z
are writing
rodzicami.
about
Wydaje się nam
cooperation
ona
with
bardzo,
parents,
bardzo ważna.
and it seems very
Wiemy, że
important.
jest trudna,
We
czy
know
też
it
bywa
is
trudna.
difficult, or
To jest
sometimes it is
oczywiste.
difficult, that's quite
I
clear,
rozumiemy to,
and
ale z
we
drugiej strony
understand
jakby
the
gdzieś
difficulty. On the
w
other
tym
hand,
ekosystemie
in this
czytelniczym
reading
dostrzegamy
ecosystem,
w
we
jakiś sposób.
notice parents,
Wydaje
and
się nam, że oni
it
nie mogą być
seems that
wielkimi
they
nieobecnymi i że
cannot be absent from
trzeba
this.
wspólnie rozmawiać o tym, jak rodziców
So we need
angażować.
to talk together on how to engage parents as
Postulujemy
well.
też
What we are also
obecność książek w
postulating is
klasach
to have
1-3,
books
najpierw
present
czyli
in
wieczyczek
grades
w
1
klasach
to 3,
1-3.
that is in the
One
libraries there.
oczywiście budują wszystko, czyli
They
budują
obviously
przyjemność,
develop everything, their
stanowią
pleasure,
biotok, o którym mówi
are
Kinga,
they
dają
biotopic
wybór, który
environment
buduje
Kinga was
przyjemność,
referring to
świadomość,
and
że dziecko ma szansę samo
help
wybrać, co
develop
czyta, to
the pleasure. If a
lepiej się
child
sprawdza.
can choose what they
Nie
want
stają
to
się też
read, it works
oczywistością,
better
więc to
and they
jest
become
i metodologię
obvious
wprowadzania
thing. And the
książek do
methodology
klas,
of introducing
postępujemy
books in the
mówimy o
classroom,
OS-ach.
this is what we are trying to describe as well.
Ekosystem czytelniczy
The
też
reading
w jakiś sposób
ecosystem,
tak troszeczkę się przyglądamy jakby bardzo
we are
konkretnym
looking
rzeczom,
at
które
that
mogą
and
być i
some very
dziesięcioczęścią,
specific
czyli
things which can be
różnymi pomysłami
part of
praktycznymi,
that,
ale też
some
nie będę ich
practical
rozwijać,
ideas. I'm
bo
not going to
nie
dwell upon that
czasu nie na
in any
nie
great
mojego.
detail, not to
Natomiast
extend and expand
summa
my
summarum
presentation, but in summary,
widzimy, tak? Czyli
this
to
is
jest
what
jakaś rodzaj takiej
we
mapy
see.
drogowej
Is that a sort
tego
of a
profilu, jak
roadmap,
dojść do profilu
the profile,
absolwenta
how to
szkolnego, który
reach
jest naszym
the
idealnym
profile of a
przykładem.
reading school
I teraz,
graduate,
czyli to jest
an
wszystko to,
ideal
co ja
one.
już powiedziałam. Wczesna
So
diagnoza,
this is all I've said already.
ewaluacja
Early
kompetencji dzieci na
diagnosis,
wejściu do szkoły,
evaluation of
tak? Czyli
children
szybko
when they enter
wypierające nowe
school. So we
problemy.
identify
Wczesna
problems as soon
interwencja,
as
czyli
possible.
towarzyszenie
Early
poznawcze,
intervention,
systemowo,
a
skutecznie.
systemic approach to
Wsparcie dla dzieci,
help children catch
które
up
jakby nie rozumieją przyjemności
and
czytania, bo do
support
nich nie zostały
offered
zaproszone.
for children who do not
I
understand the pleasure of
rozszerzenie,
reading
powtarzam,
because they
takiego
haven't been
otoczenia i
invited to do
objętości.
so, and
Joanna
extending the
mówi,
range of
i też
activities. Joanna will be
Monika,
talking about
jeżeli
that, and
dobrze
Monica,
pamiętam.
if I remember correctly,
Przez co osiągamy wyrównanie poziomu kompetencji. Z
which
drugiej
helps
strony, to,
us
co na dole
equalize
przybyłam,
competence,
czyli
and also
przyjemność i nawyk,
at the
które
bottom the
budujemy
pleasure and
cały
the
czas
habit
poprzez
that we are
działający
developing throughout
ekosystem
the time,
czytelniczy, poprzez te książki
working
w klasie,
as
poprzez to, że
reading
dziecko ma
system through
wybór
books at
tego, co
school,
czyta,
that
poprzez
children have a
przyjazne
choice of what
biblioteki
they are
i codzienne
reading,
wspólne
friendly
czytanie w klasie.
libraries, and
To jest
reading
coś, co
together in the
gdzieś
classroom
jest
every
takim
day.
fundamentem,
This is
bez
the
którego w ogóle te
foundation without
kompetencje
which the
niewiele nam dadzą, tak? To
competence
znaczy,
will not help
trochę,
us
tak
a
jak powiedział
lot.
pan dyrektor
Director
na
has said a
początku,
little
prawda?
about
Czyli,
that
że
to begin with,
dzieci potrafią czytać,
that
ale tego
children
nie
can
lubią.
read, but
I
they
co my z
don't
tym
like it.
zrobimy
And
i jak
what
to
are
kładzie
we
cienie
to
potem
do
na dalszym ich
with
życiu.
that, and how this
Więc
casts a shadow
z
on
tego
our further
wyrównania
life?
kompetencji, które na
So that
początku
equalizing of
można by zaadresować,
competence,
widzimy
which
masę
could be addressed
korzyści,
to begin with, we
czyli
see a lot of benefits from
prowadzenie
that.
klasy,
That is
gdzie ten element
having
wyrównany, no to
a
też
class
książki w
with
tym środowisku kompletnie
equal
nie trzeba tłumaczyć,
levels.
dlaczego to
This
jest
does not
u
need
niebo
to be
lepsza
explained
sytuacja.
why.
No
This
i
is far
oczywiście też
better.
tak zwane przerabianie
And
materiału
so-called
następuje
going
szybciej,
through
jeżeli
the
jakby mamy klasę,
school material
która te
is
nie dość,
better and
że ma
faster,
nawyk i że
because we've
dobrze
got
lubi czytać,
children
to
who
jeszcze
have
ma
this habit and
kompetencje
they like
czytelnicze, no
reading,
to
and
jest
they've got
oczywiście jakiś
reading
ideał. No i
competences, and
to
this
nas
is an ideal
doprowadza,
picture.
tak nam się
And this
wydaje,
leads us,
do
as
takiego
we see
absolwenta,
that,
który lubi czytać,
to
to
a
jest ta
school
podstawa, no
graduate
ale w
who
związku z
likes
tym też
reading,
potrafi
and this
czytać.
is the basis.
No
But
i
they
tutaj jest taki
can
trik na
read
sam
as well. So
koniec,
we've got this week at the very end,
wielkie zaskoczenie.
a big surprise.
Uważamy bardzo mocno,
We
że dla
strongly
takiego,
believe that
powiedzmy, absolwenta, czy dla takiego
for
ucznia
a
klasy
school
starszej, te lektury, o których dzisiaj
graduate
decydujemy,
or
tak
a
jakby
student in later grades,
debatowane
the
i
mandatory
w
reading
jakiś sposób
list this is
i
being
obciążają tą
debated
debatę
about,
nasze,
and they
one nie
cast
będą
a sort of
stanowiły
burden on the
bariery
debate. They will not
w sensie
be a
kompetencyjnym.
barrier in the sense of
Oni
the
będą sobie
competence.
dyskutować i te
They'll
książki
be
niekoniecznie im się będą
discussing
podobać,
they may
ale
not
to nie
like
znaczy,
these
że
books, which does not
ale będą w
mean
stanie bardziej niż
they'll
dzisiaj przy
be able
takiej,
to
że
a
tak powiem,
greater
realizacji
extent than
takiej
today
mapy drogowej.
with
Wydaje
this
nam się, że takie
roadmap.
dzieci będą
we believe that these children will be able to take a better approach to reading the mandatory books like Potop, one of the items on the mandatory reading list. Someone will say, well, I don't like it because it's an old thing. Others will say, well, yes, I like it. And then we'll reach the success which Minister Nowacka mentioned, creative thinking, logical thinking. I haven't gone into the research which proves that reading builds these things, but this research does exist. And if you're interested, I'll be glad to answer your questions. And then this game of ours, I wouldn't like to call it that way. We've got a deadline for that. We've got very serious research and surveys showing that we should make this great effort at the beginning of school education. And children have to like it and learn to read early, because then it's going to be very, very difficult for them, or much more difficult. So there's focus at the beginning of school education. This is what matters a lot. Last thing, we can still enroll on ratownicy czytelnictwa, like reading rescue professionals, a community of teachers, developing the pleasure of reading in their respective schools. If you're interested, go to that website. I will share this presentation, but on the website of the foundation, our brochures are available to be downloaded free of charge. You do not even have to leave your email address. So that's all from me. I think I've managed to keep to the time limit. There was a question where we can find the brochure you mentioned, and you've just answered this question on the website of fbc.org. You can download these. We've got two questions and words of deep respect and appreciation for what you are doing. We are going to have Ms. Alison David soon, who will present the results of research on reading for pleasure. Before we go to that, I saw you joining during the presentation by Maria. The next presentation and the next one will be in English. If you need translation into Polish, the translation will be available once you click the globe at the bottom of the page on the Polish Zoom. Tłumaczenie, interpretation services, tłumaczenie ustne, you can join that. Alison David, she's a director for consumer research, for Fasho publishing books for children at any age. She has worked in a variety of capacities. She has authored the book Help Your Child Not Reading, and this is based on her experience as a researcher and as a mother. Alison, please tell us about children reading in the UK. This is going to be interesting for us in the context of Polish education.
Hello, let me just share my screen, hopefully. Is that good? All good?
Everything's working fine. All good.
Wonderful. Oh, wonderful. Okay, well, dzień dobry. I tried to learn some Polish. Good morning. I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. So I'm going to share a short view of what we know and how we're thinking about children's reading for pleasure in the UK at the moment. I work for the two children's publishing divisions of HarperCollins Books. So that's HarperCollins children's books and Farshawe. And Farshawe in the UK used to be Egmont. So there's my connection with Maria. So first thing I wanted to say, oops. Why is my screen not moving? Sorry.
Maybe try using arrows on your...
Got it. I've got my arrows. Sorry. Yes,
Okay.
Here we go. So yes, we publish a really broad range of books. I've just put a few here to show you. And the reason I'm sharing this is because I wanted to make the point that we're trying to offer something to interest every child, every entry point for reading, to try to tempt them into reading. We started researching children's reading in 2012, and we now have 12 years, therefore, of trend data into what's going on in the UK, and also findings from many, many research projects that we've done in the school setting and with families, with parents and children. So we've got a clear understanding of the barriers and the motivators to children's reading for pleasure. And I will share some of what we know. So there's so much talk about reading for pleasure, and that's the purpose of today, I know. But I thought it was worth talking about what exactly is it, because through our research with children, with parents, as I said, and in the school environment, we've found that it's very often confused and conflated with literacy. So reading for pleasure, I think we can say, is reading that children choose to do in their free time. So they have the will to do it, or the motivation to read for their enjoyment, for their interests, for relaxation maybe. So if they're reading for pleasure, they're engaged with reading for personal satisfaction of some kind. And when we compare this with literacy, the differences are really clear, because literacy is the ability to read and write, or to use language proficiently. So literacy we can see as a skill, compared to reading for pleasure being a will, if you like. Children learn to read, to decode, to understand. And the thing about it is it's something that they must do. There's schoolwork and there's reading homework, so it's not a choice for them. And children, we know, are often disengaged with it. So they are different, but they're very, very much connected. The relationship is reciprocal, because when children read for pleasure, it improves their literacy skills, their attainment and their communication skills. And children who have good literacy skills are more likely to enjoy reading, because obviously if reading's difficult, it's not much fun. So research, multiple research, which I'm sure you all know, shows the impact of reading for pleasure on attainment is really enormous. Children benefit from a richer general knowledge, vocabulary, improved spelling, better reading comprehension, wider school achievement in general. And you'll be very familiar with these examples I'm going to share, I'm sure. But I thought they do bear repeating and repeating and repeating, because the impact of reading for pleasure is truly astonishing. So we know this one. The OECD finds the impact of it on a child's academic success is greater than the family's socioeconomic status. So that speaks straight back to Maria's point about equal opportunities. The impact on vocabulary, spelling and maths is 4 times greater than if you've got a mum or a dad with a degree. This research from Torper found that among 7 to 17-year-olds, more frequent reading for pleasure predicts better reading comprehension. And back to the PISA data we all talk about so much because it's so important, it shows that engagement in reading is strongly correlated with reading performance. So pupils who said they liked reading the most scored on average 34 points more than those that said they didn't like reading. And PISA data also shows us that reading for pleasure is a mediator of gender or socioeconomic status. So again, back to those equal opportunities. The other thing we are very interested in at the moment in the UK is the impact on well-being. So the increase in mental health problems among children and young adults makes it even more important, I think, to help them develop a reading habit. And we know that reading reduces depression, it increases self-confidence, resilience, helps children to relax. We know that when children read, they gain better understanding of the world, of themselves, of others. They have better communication skills. And we know that when they are read to, they experience deep, deep happiness, deep comfort, deep reassurance. It's incredibly bonding. So we did some research last year at Farshawe, and we found on average that 34% of 8 to 17s describe themselves as, in general, very happy in 2023. But then when we put different filters on the data, among those who were heavy readers, this rose to 47%, saying they were in general very happy. And importantly, among those who thought of themselves as a reader, if that was part of their identity, really, it was so powerful. 52% said they were in general very happy in 2023. And at age 11, reading for enjoyment is associated with higher levels of self-esteem, and even more so when it's done with your parents on a regular basis. So this is very powerful emotionally. Excuse me. So it's incredibly important that children do read for pleasure, and so much so that the OECD, again, says finding ways to engage students in reading may be one of the most effective ways to leverage social change, equal opportunities. So the problem is, in the UK, and I'm sure it's the same for you, but in the UK, fewer children are choosing to read for pleasure. So here I'm just comparing 2012 with 2023, just to give you a kind of few years difference. And if I draw your attention to 8 to 10-year-olds as an example, in 2012, you can see 56% chose to read for pleasure every day or nearly every day. So in this data, that means on 4 or more days a week. And last year, this was down to 29%. And you can see at the bottom of this chart that over those years, there's been no change in the 14 to 17s who choose to read daily. But what's not shown on this chart, and I want to share with you, is that the proportion who rarely or never read has absolutely jumped, especially among boys. So in 2012, 16% of boys aged 14 to 17 rarely or never read. Last year, it was 38%. And then it went from 10 to 19% for girls over the same period of time. So this is a big problem. And in response to the long-term decline in children choosing to read and to the PIRLS data, the Department for Education in England brought out some guidance for teachers in 2021. And again, they updated it in 2023. And they talk in that both of the critical importance of acquiring reading skills and of the importance of engagement in reading, the will or the motivation to read. And I just pulled out some extracts for you, just to illustrate the kind of thing they're saying. So they say that children need to become engaged with reading from the beginning and be motivated to continue reading. They also say that they recognise that pupils who are reading regularly for enjoyment are basically giving themselves unofficial reading lessons, literacy lessons, really. And that it's essential that schools plan systematically to nurture pupils' desire to read. It cannot be left to chance. So I'm going to go back to our research at Farshawe now and share why it is that we found that children are not reading for pleasure. And we found 3 main reasons. And I'm just going to have, because of time, just go through these sort of top level. Children are choosing to spend the majority of their free time with digital entertainment, screens, playing games, watching videos, TV, on social media. Basically, there's little time left for anything else. You know, reading's gone down, but also is playing outside, doing arts and crafts, lots of other things are affected. Children think of reading only as a subject to learn, something that they have to do at school and for homework. It's not something that they think that they could enjoy. They don't think they could, and they wouldn't therefore consider doing it in their free time. And often as well, they really struggle to find books that interest them. This is really critical. Children are not being read to. This chart, I'll just talk you through it, but you can see what's been happening since 2012. So we're looking at the percentage of children who are read to at home every day or nearly every day. And the green is showing you the 2012 statistics. And then we're just jumping forward quickly to the last 3 years. So last year is in the gold color, 2023. And if you just compare the green and the gold, you can see there's been a really steep decline. And you can also see that by the age of 8, only 21% of children are read to every day or nearly every day. So why aren't parents reading aloud? I could do a whole presentation on this, but just briefly, there are loads and loads of reasons, but you know, they think it's a chore, they think it's boring, they don't have time, perhaps they were not read to themselves, they think it's the school's job. And I think the one reason I want to focus on here is that so many parents think of reading as a skill that their child needs to learn. And that means as soon as their child can read, that they're able to do it, parents don't think they need to be involved with it anymore. And if they're short of time or they don't like it themselves, this gives them a legitimate reason to say, oh, great, I don't need to do that anymore. You know, my child can read, so that's fine. You can see this comment from a dad in one of our focus groups, and it said he used to read them when they were little, and then he stopped. So it was a mum. She stopped when they were around 5 or 6. You know, they're tiny. They can't be left on their own at this age. They need to be read to. Anyway, these 3 barriers all come together to create negative ideas about reading for children. They're not growing up experiencing any fun in reading in the home. Many parents are just focusing on reading homework and not reading aloud to them. And their reading experience at school is one of learning and of work. So they're not experiencing pleasure in reading. I think we could say they're experiencing pressure in reading. And in contrast to this, here are these screens and they're available, they're fun, they're easy, they're immediate. So here's some data to illustrate, and I've just picked on 8 to 10s here again. So we've got girls in orange and boys in blue, and large numbers, as you can see, say that they would rather watch TV or play games, go online than read. Half of boys don't enjoy reading books at this age, and a lot say they don't find reading easy either. So how do teachers turn this around? And this is a real challenge, because if you think about it, in the school environment, it's all set up and focused on teaching literacy. So there are reading lessons, children have tasks, they have targets, their ability is tested and it's measured. You know, they can get literacy right or wrong. They can do it well or they can do badly in it. And this is not fun. So if a child can read, it certainly doesn't mean that they're going to want to read, to choose to read. But the thing is that teachers are being asked to encourage reading for pleasure. And the really massive challenge with this is that you can't teach it. You can't have a reading for pleasure lesson because children can't learn it. It's not a subject. There's no right or there's no wrong. Pleasure is an outcome. Pleasure is a feeling. And so that means that the standard approach of delivering a lesson doesn't work with this. It needs a different approach, one that's strategic and designed to nurture and encourage and to share enjoyment, to focus on pleasure and not on learning. So to suggest solutions, I'm going to bring together a summary of some academic research and also our own findings working with families and schools. So research finds that children need to have free choice to encourage reading for pleasure. The desire to have agency, to have autonomy, some kind of control of your life is really a big part of growing up, and it's highly motivating to children. And the thing is, they don't often have a lot of it. Children should be able to choose their own reading material. Of course they should. But in reality, parents often choose for their child. Parents often think what they used to like when they were a child is best. You know, Roald Dahl comes up over and over. The classics are proper reading. You can't read that My Little Pony book, you know, much better than popular culture and so on. And of course, in the school environment, children have to follow reading schemes. So if all this together is their only knowledge of books, it's really not a surprise that they're not interested. So finding ways to offer children genuine free choice at school is important. And I think this is a really good example of parent control. So in one of our focus groups, this dad told us how his little girls liked books with glitter and stickers. Well, of course they did, but he stopped them from choosing them because he thought they're not real books, they're not proper books. Books are not for playing with, you know, they're serious. And so you can really imagine how that must have been very motivating for his children. And here's just another comment from another one of our studies. This was a boy that we worked with, age 7. He really wasn't keen on reading at the start of this project. And through this project, he was allowed and encouraged to choose any book he wanted. By the end of it, he'd become very enthusiastic. What I think is interesting is he said to me, if I've chosen it, I know it's going to be a good book. And it sounds so simple, but underneath that is the really deeply sort of psychologically powerful idea that he's in charge of his own reading, and that gave him reading confidence and self-esteem. So children often struggle to find books that interest them. And so to encourage them to choose to read, they need to have access to a really wide range of reading materials that are culturally relevant to them and diverse. So that's all kinds, that really is popular culture through to classics. It's non-fiction, it's graphic novels, it's magazines. The thing about this is that schools need to provide this choice. So they need to have a lot of reading material in every school. But just as important, this is something that we're really focusing on, teachers themselves need to know children's books. Teachers need to read them. They need to keep up to date with new publishing, and this is coming fast, thick and fast. So they must be able, I think they must sort of get to know each child's interest in their class so that they're able to suggest and supply the right book at the right time to help those children find books that appeal. The reality is many teachers don't know children's books or only know a really limited range. So I think that building teacher knowledge is a key part of encouraging children to read for pleasure. The importance of social interaction is a relatively recent insight. So historically, reading was seen as a very individual activity, but researchers recognize that reading is actually very social, and this is an important aspect of motivating children to read. Because when reading is social, reading's fun. When it's social, it creates reading communities and it can stimulate engagement. So I think adopting a social approach in school removes the pressure to learn. So things like informal book talk, chatting about books, both planned and spontaneous, is very important. And the Department for Education in England suggests that teachers should establish book clubs in their classes. And the other thing is that reading aloud is a very powerful tool, which I'll come on to in a moment. So this comment is from a really highly regarded teacher in the UK. He's won a couple of times. He's won our teacher awards, actually, and he's a blogger and very vocal. But he says a class of children enjoying the same text has a bigger impact on creating a class reading community than virtually anything else. So the thing is, to build a social reading environment and to have this kind of approach, you need time and you need space. It needs to be carved out of the curriculum, and that in itself can be a challenge. So I wanted to come on to reading aloud. So our research has found that reading aloud to children is so effective in encouraging them to choose to read, both at home and at school. And in both cases, it works because it just changes the atmosphere. It's stress-free for children. The pressure's off. It's a huge treat. It's just for enjoyment. And children relax as a result. And they find it so enjoyable that they're enthused and motivated to try it for themselves. So the first thing I wanted to share is some really interesting data from the home environment. And I'll talk you through this chart. It's not too complicated. So this example is with 8 to 13-year-olds, and it's showing us the percentage of children who are choosing to read every day or nearly every day. That's in the orange blocks at the bottom. But those are according to how often they're read to at home. So the left-hand column is showing us what happens when children are read to by their parents at home infrequently. And you can see only 18% also choose to read daily themselves. The middle column is showing us what happens when they're read to weekly by their parents. So 19% also choose to read daily in that situation. But you can also see a few more are picking up books a bit more often, shown in the yellow, choosing to read weekly too. But the right-hand column shows the magic that happens when they're read to every day by their parents. 59% also choose to read daily themselves. It's not instead of, it's as well as. So this works in the school setting too. So we tested the impact of daily story time with 3,000 7 to 10-year-olds and 86 teachers over one term. So that's just 12 weeks here in the UK. And I think that this is a really easy way to create a social reading environment. Reading aloud is modelled by the teacher. It's a shared experience. The pressure's off. with no testing, no measuring, no questions afterwards. You know, we told the teachers, do not ask them, what's the plot? You know, who's the main protagonist? There are no questions, just enjoy this. And we found that with no testing and no measuring and just fun, children engaged and became very enthusiastic. And I think this is a very practical solution. So outcomes were really very positive. So there was an increase in children's enjoyment and in their reading confidence. They had better concentration, more chose to read, and 44% of the children said they read more in their free time. And bear in mind, this is just one term, just 12 weeks. It's quite amazing that it had such a quick impact. They chose to read a wider range of books. Their reading and their comprehension ages increased, and children and teachers also said that they benefited from improved well-being. So there's a full research paper, which I've put a link to at the end, so because I haven't got time to go through it all now. But I just wanted to share with you an example that I hope you'll find really interesting. So one of these schools in our study had 59% of their 8 to 9-year-olds classified as disadvantaged in poverty. And so a test before the trial started found that only 4% of them had excellent comprehension. But at the end of the trial, 12 weeks later, this had risen to 52% with excellent comprehension. And the only difference over that term was story time. So children were so enthusiastic about the experience, and why wouldn't you be? I would have loved to have been read to every day at school, you know. They really adored it. Teachers reported that children would cheer when they said it was time for a story. And at the end of the trial, 77% of them said they wanted it to continue. So here's a typical comment from a 9-year-old who took part. He said, "It's made me like books a lot more. And I feel like if we don't carry on, then I will go back to hate reading. Also, I feel like it's made a lot of people in my class like reading." And this is from a teacher. He said, "Story time, it's the point at which book chats emerge organically. It's your way into a reading for pleasure culture. Children wanting to discover books. Story time is the beating heart for other reading for pleasure practices that should go on in school." So a really key finding was that story time should ideally be daily. And that's what, as I said at the beginning, this is what we set out to test. But what we found was that some teachers couldn't fit it in every day because the demands of the curriculum in the UK are so huge. There is so much crammed into every day. What we found was that teachers reported it really must be frequent. So some of them had been reading occasionally to the children before joining our study. And they noticed that the increased frequency maintains children's engagement in the story and it maintains their enthusiasm. So this trial, it really was a huge success. And I think it was highly effective and importantly at a low cost. But as I said, the challenge was fitting it in every single day for 20 minutes. Children were read to very frequently and more than they had been before. On average, it was about 4 days a week. If it could be every day, it would be incredible. So with our new UK government and a curriculum review ongoing, we're very much hoping that daily story time will be made mandatory. So if this happens, can you imagine it would be transformational for children because no child would be left out. Children who are not being read to at home would have the opportunity to discover a love of reading. And if we go back to, again, to what the OECD said, finding ways to engage students in reading may be one of the most effective ways to leverage social change. So you can imagine the potential impact on society if children just had story time every day throughout primary school. So I think from what I've been saying, the importance of the teachers themselves is absolutely clear in all of these ideas because they're the ones that can create a social environment. They need to learn about children's books, help children find the books that they're going to like. They can read aloud to children. They can encourage children to find the joy in reading. And there is some truly amazing work going on in some schools in the UK. And the Open University is an absolutely leading light for reading for pleasure and for developing the teaching profession. And you can find loads of amazing resources on their website. And our Reading for Pleasure Awards at HarperCollins are in association with the Open University in the UK Literacy Association. So what we're trying to do here is recognise teachers and educators who put reading for pleasure at the heart of their practice. And what's so great about it is that winners share their practice and become examples of excellence and case studies for the profession. So in this way, we hope that we can share best practice. Actually, that brings me to the end of my short presentation. If you'd like to know more about some of the things I've just touched on, I've put some links here so you can find the full reports. I really hope that was useful. I'm going to try Polish again. Dziękuję. Any questions?
Thank you, Alison. I'm greatly impressed by your presentation. We've got a question on chat about whether the research you were involved in, did you have this motive of connection, a bond between children and the parents when the parents who read to their children in preschool age every day or maybe less frequently, but still?
I'm not sure I understand the question, sorry, but yes. So the relationship between children and parents, perhaps if I talk about that, we've seen that for over years and years. It's incredibly powerful because children feel absolutely wrapped up in love when they're read to. And I think it's so important because so many preschool children are not being read to. So they're not associating reading with enjoyment and with pleasure at all. So they're starting school without those positive ideas. And I think that when you're read to, because it makes you feel so wonderfully happy, safe, secure, loved, it's a very powerful psychological thing because it creates positive psychology and children start school and have an idea that there can be enjoyment in reading. So I think we need to think about the psychology of it.
Thank you very much for your answer. In your presentation, what was important for me, what you said about the independence and autonomy of children, that can be a problem at school when there is a mandatory book to read at school. For my daughter, a mandatory book to read might be interesting, but well, it's something I have to read, so it makes it less attractive immediately. So these are all questions at the moment, I think. Maybe there'll be further questions later on. We've got now Monika Pochankę-Smith, who is a teacher in early years at American School of Warsaw. She has graduated from Queen's College in New York. She was educated in Columbia College. She is a lecturer in the Department of Pedagogy at the University of Warsaw, and she teaches about literature for children, and she will tell us how about balanced literacy. I don't know whether the Polish equivalent is the way it should sound. How this works in primary grades and how to develop the reading skills in primary grades.
Good morning, and thank you, Marcin, for introducing me. It's my great pleasure to be a part of this discussion, and especially after listening to Maria and Alison. And I'm so happy that I can confirm all of the things they said and speak as a practitioner, as a teacher in American School of Warsaw. Let me share my screen.
Okay, we seem to be seeing your presentation correctly.
Yeah. Is everything good? Yeah, everybody can see it? Okay.
Yes, everything's fine.
Okay, so American School of Warsaw, it's a huge school serving children from preschool to grade 12 to the graduation of the high school. And we start our reading and writing programs, our literacy programs, right from preschool year. So we thought it will be necessary to develop a system, a framework that will guide all of the teachers and parents and students as well in developing that pleasure of reading, although we call it literacy, right? The balanced literacy. Why did we pick that model and that framework? Well, we definitely strongly believe, and my colleagues before already talked about student agency and student choice, how important it is. We strongly believe that effective teaching and learning, it has to be paired with the student's choice, especially when we are a PYP IB school where student agencies put forth anything else. So our reading and writing curriculum is guided by not only by our beliefs and concepts of the national curriculum, American standards, but also we closely listen to what students are interested in. And through that, we form engagements and activities for students, but at the same time, thinking and remembering about such a thing as a gradual release of responsibility. I will talk about it in a second. What is it and what is this for? Also, when I present to you balanced literacy components, you will see that, and a gradual release of responsibility, you will see that this is not sequential. We will not start at some point like teaching a concept or a skill and then move on and we'll forget about that. Okay, it's done, it's taught already, but it is recursive. So we go back. If we see if the child needs some reminder, some revision of the teaching and learning, then we do that. So balanced literacy, as you can see on the screen, has a lot of components. Reading, of course, writing, assessment, word study, speaking, and listening. I will not talk about all of them in details and all of those different subcomponents, but rather about reading. In shared reading, guided reading, independent reading, modeled reading, and read aloud. I think Alison was talking about the role of story time or read aloud. Well, we distinguish between a read aloud and a story time. At least I do in my classroom. I teach second grade right now, but I taught kindergarten. So, and I have to admit that I'm very proud to say that yes, story time happens every day and read aloud happens every day, but those are two different things. During the read aloud, I will talk about it in a different slide. So, but as you can see, reading and writing and speaking and listening, word study and assessment, all are those components of literacy. But it doesn't mean, the word balance, it doesn't mean that we spend the same amount of time in the classroom for each of those. It means that we consider all of them while designing and planning our curriculum and students' engagements and tasks, but it all depends on individual needs of children. It was already said, I think also Alison was talking about it, or Maria, that what has to happen first when a child enters our school is assessment. So it's identification of his or her needs. And then based on that, we can then form together with a child, because it's very important for a child to be a part of that process, to form goals. So if the child needs a lot of word study activities or phonics, or phonological awareness is kind of like delayed or needs to be addressed, then we do that. If I have in my classroom very proficient readers who read chapter books already, and they really don't need me training them in spelling during writing, then of course I spend less time with them on that aspect of balanced literacy. But all of these components have to be present in our daily functioning in the classroom. Well, and it's really after those two presentations before me, yes, I totally agree. We want our children to become strong readers who read for pleasure. I am a strong reader. It means I can understand, which is a comprehension. I can read words, which is accuracy, being able to decode words, and I can read smoothly, which is fluency. And reading for pleasure, I think, connects Alison was talking about literacy and reading for pleasure. They are very interconnected. If I create an environment, and let me just move to this slide and we go back to the previous one. If I create an environment, classroom must-haves, this is my physical environment, that all of those things are present in my classroom. I wish I can take you there, right there, out downstairs and show you how does it look like, but I'll show you some pictures. Then I am fulfilling not only needs of developing literacy or addressing literacy, but also reading for pleasure. So there is a small group meeting area, independent reading space, book bins and book boxes. Those are individual boxes when children keep their books that they read ongoing, daily ongoing and taking home or sitting during independent reading time or reading with me. Of course, the classroom library is huge. We have hundreds of books in each classroom for children to explore. Anchor charts. Those are charts that are hanging on the walls and other spaces visible for children to kind of educate them or just reminding them about strategies we talked about maybe some goals that they have and something that they need to work on. Word walls. Word walls are walls covered with words that they need to be able to spell in this particular grade. Writing station, of course, there's a reading and writing every day, and so they write at their desks. And then, of course, gathering area for read aloud, for shared reading, for story time. And then you have must-do approaches. So already mentioned, reader, excuse me, hold on. Read aloud, direct instructions, so it's a mini lesson. I'll talk about it briefly, you really don't have time to talk about it, so many of them. Guided reading, guided writing. Conferring is very important. Conferring meaning the teacher is talking to a student, brief, really brief 3-5 minute conversations about how is it going? What are you doing? What can I help you with? Independent reading, response to text, independent writing, and so on. You can just read the list. But what you see on your screen and components of that balanced literacy framework, it is a must do for every teacher in our school. Sometimes teachers come to our school from a different settings, from different schools, even from states. They come from different states, and different states in the United States vary in their approaches and their programs, curriculums, and so on. So we thought we should have a one unified program. It's not a curriculum, it's just a framework, because nobody tells us what content to teach within a read aloud, right? So I can pick read aloud themes or concepts. But let's go back to this one, right? When in the beginning of my presentation, I was talking about something that's called gradual release of responsibility. So, and then you can see those instructional approaches being differentiated through, first of all, we start with the modeled lesson or modeled task or modeled strategy, where the teacher says to students, I do it, and you watch me how I do it. when we want to teach rhyming words, the teacher, Miss Smith, is going to show you what words, and this is probably for preschool, kindergarten. For my second graders, I will model something totally different. And then let's do it together, shared reading, shared writing. Let's do it together. Yesterday, we read the big book about landforms because we're learning about landforms. And we found some rhyming words there, but we also found that these words are with the silent E. So it was a great opportunity for me to use it as a little word study lesson. And then you have a guided approach, guided reading or guided writing approach when, okay, students with teacher in a small group, not the whole class, but a small group, let's do it together. I will help you go through that process. And of course, the ultimate goal is to be independent. You do it, you can do it. So from whole group to small group to independent practice. And then again, I was talking already about it, it's not sequential, but recursive. Anytime during that process, let's say during a guided lesson, guided reading lesson, you think that you have to go back to the modeled approach, right? Let's go and do one more lesson about reading with the intonation, for example. So you just kind of make those judgments as you go along and daily and as you present it to students. Okay, so we talked about those must-dos. Now, okay, so here on this picture, so you can see how does it look like in practice in our school, right? So and you see the small groups, you see also partner work. When children sit at the table with the teacher, this is when the guided reading is happening. When the child is hanging off the chair with the book upside down, this is definitely independent reading time. Speaking of sitting like this, we allow children to sit anywhere they want and how they want in the classroom for their independent reading. Sorry, I'm jumping. But when we talk about classroom library, one word about that. You will see a picture of my library in a few slides, but the classroom library is accessible for all kids, no matter what their reading level. I will not put, or most of the teachers in my school will not put levels of the books, and levels are important because they tell you where you are in your reading career, right? So if you are on A, you hardly can read, basic CVC words, but when you are on Z, you're probably an adult reading Harry Potter, or no, Harry Potter is probably even less than Z, So I don't want children to see the level so they do not judge each other, but say they have access to all the books and they decide if the book is right for them. We teach them that model of that behavior kind of picking just right book. What is the just right book for me? Let's see, because those books will give me pleasure. Those books will be effective enough for me. So the just right books are the books that are not too hard and not too easy. So you need to make your own choice. We have to teach them, of course. It's not like it doesn't happen. Okay, go pick and just write books. No, I will teach you how to determine which book is just right. So if you see, so there are some rules, some tricks how for the kids to know if the book is just right. Sometimes.
Sorry, Monica.
Yes.
There's a question. Could you please return to the previous slide?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
This one?
I believe so, yes.
Yes. And?
Thank you. Please continue.
Okay, so because I was talking about libraries and it's on the other slide. Okay.
Oh, I see. So
yeah,
maybe...
I am aware what slide I am on. And yeah, well, I'm finished with this slide.
Okay, there's a
Martin,
thank you
do you
on the
still want me
chat.
to keep this and talk?
No. Please,
Okay.
please move on.
Yeah,
I'm sorry
I'm
for
sorry.
inconvenience.
That's why I'm saying I'm sorry. I'm jumping back and forth, but there's so many things to talk. I'm talking about classroom libraries right now, and as a component of that framework, and how important it is to have variety of books that are available for kids to reach out and read. Okay. Now, okay, so we see, so then we can move to the specific approaches that I mentioned before. So modeled reading, or sometimes I call it guided read aloud. And I remember Alison talking about the story time. So it's kind of a story time, but with it's intentional, it's planned. A story time would be something that children will pick. I usually give them a choice. So it's like a Charlotte's Web, some big chapter book. But the modeled reading is I usually pick that book to address a concept or a strategy that I would like to visibly show my thinking through, right? So and it's usually integrates context across curriculum. So it could be like right now we're learning about landforms. Probably it will be a book used through my modeled reading will be a nonfiction book about landforms in some form. I found that it's very hard to find a fiction book about landforms, but so this is how is it done for. So, and it's not, it's done daily. It's not a huge time spent on that, but it's just brief and very purposeful. And like I said, it's for demonstrating skill or strategy. You can see in those tables, and you can kind of see the difference. What is modeled reading is not, right? So it's not just reading a story. That would be a story time. Now, shared reading is using text that is visible for children and teacher at the same time. So it's usually a big book, a book projected on the screen. And at any point of the book, and especially when you read it over and over again for pleasure, you invite children to read with you. Usually those are poems or books with the repetitive text, and they are very often used in the lower grades, preschool, kindergarten, first grade. But sometimes even in second grade, we use big books as well, or we have a projected text. In our grade, actually, we use poetry a lot. So of course, children do not learn poems by heart, but they enjoy poetry through choral reading, although shared reading is not a choral reading, but kind of like sharing the process of reading behaviors, intonation, maybe some decoding strategies. What do we do with that? Okay. And then you have and on this slide, you have a comparison between those two models and those two approaches. They both very well planned, and I always tell my students, not the second graders, the students at the Teachers College, that please remember to read the book before you read it to children. Many times we make this mistake that we just, we are out of time, we are in a rush, we just poke and it's a beautiful book, let me read it to kids, and then we are surprised in the middle of the book because this is not exactly what we wanted to read to them. So it has to be pre-read. And we need to realize what goal is it to be served. Is it a strategy? Is it I do it for mainly for different concepts, those universal concepts of friendship, of love, of loyalty, of help, of health, of taking care of someone, or disadvantaged children, because our population in our school is definitely advantaged population. So it's a private school. So so just to show them life as it is in all of the different aspects, but also books about their lives as well, like conflicts between them. And I guide them, sometimes I call it a guided reading, guided read aloud through the book with questions. And I know that Alison mentioned something that the kids, when they are faced with questions during story time, they hesitate to participate. I find my kids very engaged with questions, and of course, some of them, they choose not to participate, and they don't have to participate. Usually out of 20, you have like five, 6 kids who always raise their hands. So books I use to read for read-alouds or shared reading. So on the left, you can see those big books, and the cow that went oink, it's definitely a book for kindergarten or preschool, where the kids are very easily able to read with a teacher. Those capitalized words like oink, you know, all the sounds that animals make, and they are proud that they are able to read with kids, with the teacher. Now on the right, on the picture on the right, those are my books I use for read aloud. So like Name Jar, this is identity. Letting Swift River Go, this is about environment. Owl Moon, a beautiful story about father-son connection and going through the beautiful wintry landscape. Westlandia is also about environment. How can we protect environment? Now, guided reading and guided instruction. So this is where the teacher sits with a small group of children and guide them through their process of reading. Those, it says over here, flexible groupings. Yes, because they are not set in stone. Let's say we identify children's reading levels in the beginning of the year, but it could change. It goes through phases. Children make progress, or children do not make enough progress to stay in that group. The group moves on and the child stays behind, so we need to adjust and we need to be flexible. And it's always based on student needs. Sometimes I call it a strategy lesson because I teach to all of the children the same strategy during those sessions, but most of the time the students are sitting around at the table and I'm listening to their reading. And I listen for accuracy and I listen for fluency. Comprehension happens during my individual conversation conferences, right? Student-teacher conferences. Usually they are like 10, 15 minutes long. It used to be years ago when I was starting to teach reading, we had that approach that everybody at the table read the same book, and students took turns reading. Okay, one page, one student A, second page student B, and so on. But now we move away from that model where children are reading it quietly to themselves, kind of like whispering, and I'm observing, monitoring, taking notes, making some observations, and determining the next steps and acting upon those that data. So these are the books we're using. Those are very simple books, and I just picked books from the level A and B for used for kindergarten, maybe first grade. But some of my students even use ABC books, and they are just right books for them. Although, so what about these books? This is not like any book about cat and mouse or bananas sometimes. They are scientifically designed based on a scope and sequence of phonetic and phonological acquisition of children. So, of course, what happens first is the alphabet, right? And correlation between the letters and sounds. That's basic. And well, I'm not going to say it should happen in preschool, kindergarten, because it varies and children develop at different pace. Even in second grade, I had some kids who still don't know the full alphabet yet and the correlation. Or you receive kids in the classroom that are from the different life circumstances, and they come from different educational systems. And I have a girl who never had a school experience, and she jumped because she's age appropriate, and she's old enough to be in second grade, but she never even saw alphabet in her life because nobody taught her. She came straight from preschool. So, yeah, the levels of our readers in our schools are very different. The spectrum that you have in the classroom is from readers on the level ABC to Harry Potter readers. So, you have to accommodate all of them through different activities and engagements. So now you may want to ask, but what about that book about landforms over here, over the waterfall? How come a child on the level, that's so on the left, you see the covers of those books, and on the right, you see what's inside the book. So helicopter over Hawaii, how come the child is able to read it? Well, and this is a level A, right? Well, this is, it is possible thanks to a picture. So one of the strategies that we teach our kids to decode and to be able to read a book is to look at the picture and kind of, what do you think this word, like over there, it is already a sight word being introduced to them. But waterfall, it is a complex word. But okay, so what do you see in the picture? What is the helicopter over? What do you see in the beginning of the word? So there are different strategies. The beginning letter, what sound does it make? What do you see on the picture? Let's sound it out. And the beauty of that system is that the child feels successful. Wow, I can read this book. I always say, whoa, you read such a big word. And actually, it's kind of guessing, but the feeling of success is priceless. Now, the bananas sometimes bananas sometimes look like telephones. It's a repetition. Every page, it will repeat. So if we go through together with the child through the first sentence, hopefully he or she will be able to decode the next pages, because it's a repetitive text. The same with the helicopter, over the mountains. Probably the next page is also over the something. And so on. So there are 3 or 4 different strategies that we teach through those small books, but they have to be, they are not any simple books. The words in those books, they have to be designed according to the scope and sequence. So from the alphabet, we move on to the consonants and vowels, and words that are CVC, we call it CVC words, so consonant, vowel, consonant, cat, and sight words, right? Over, the, over. So those are sight words, are the words that are very common for English language. So there's no decoding, there's no sounding out. The child eventually and ultimately has to know it by sight. Like when I see the word over, I don't have to decode it, or the, or I. There's the whole list. Every grade level has a list of sight words that the child needs to, or is is kind of like ideally if he or she masters that. Now, independent reading, do I have time? I have a few more minutes, okay. So independent reading is the most precious time, right? So it's not silent. It's my kids going to the library. Well, let me show you. To the library on the right, you have library boxes. There's some slots are empty. Probably they took them out, and they can really dig into whatever they want to dig in. And even if they cannot read the text, they can look through the pictures. During that independent reading time, we kind of move from child to child, and we confer, we ask, like I said before, how are you doing? What are you reading? Why do you like this book? Okay. So, and the picture on the left, those are book boxes. They also can use their book boxes for the books that they haven't finished, or they are the books that are being picked by the teacher for guided reading. So for practice, they need to practice, and sometimes they take it home. Okay, so that's our, very briefly. I didn't have enough time to share the whole. Stop sharing. Okay, the whole different as we talk with teachers every day, have several meetings about how to improve our literacy and teaching reading and writing practice and the literacy time. But it's a precious time that we spend on enjoying and hopefully building that pleasure for reading. Thank you.
Thank you, Monika, very much for familiarizing us with your technique, how to teach reading and how to make it easily accessible for children, to make it a pleasure rather than something that they have to do at school. I can't see any questions at the moment. Your presentation was really clear, I think. We're going to have a 10-minute break. We'll be back at 11:40. The break was planned to start at 11:40, but I think we can have this time for this break to have an extra cup of tea or coffee. We'll be back 10 minutes from now, 11:40, and we'll be talking with Dr. Kinga Białek about connections between cultural text and emotions. We'll be back at 11:40. See you.
Welcome after the break. During our seminar on reading for pleasure, we are going to listen to the next presentation by Dr. Joanna Dobkowska from Pedagogical Department of the University of Warsaw. She is a Polish teacher, PhD of Humanities in Linguistics, and she works at the Pedagogical Faculty of the University of Warsaw, and she also trains teachers of primary schools. She is an expert on the Polish language, cooperating with the Ministry of Education, and a member of the Polish Academy of Sciences, and she will tell us about adaptation of elements of method of balanced literacy for teaching reading in the Polish language. Can everyone hear me? Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. I am so glad. Good. So let me just say that this presentation, or this proposal included in the presentation, was prepared on the basis of my experience in my teaching career, because I've always felt that what is happening in first grade, second grade, but sometimes also third grade in teaching reading is not the right direction, actually responding to the needs of contemporary students and pupils. So I would like to encourage everyone to go further out and think out of the box, outside of methods that we have used so far. Of course, it requires some experience, but results are very satisfactory. So for people who do not have direct contact with didactics of reading short information, that methodology that we are using at the moment in teaching reading and writing is a synthetic analytical method prepared by Ewa and Felix Przyłupscy in 1975. And you remember, some of you may remember these books. I Am Six, Letters, 1975. Many participants of the seminar may remember these books from our schools till the end of the 1990s. It was the only proposal in primary schools. And then, after the textbook market was opened, they became an example and starting point for all other textbooks, which nowadays function in the didactic space. So this particular textbook that you can see on screen, or you can see a fragment of that to the left, and to the right, you can see a textbook which is actually based on analytical and synthetic methods coined in the 1970s. And this method is about introducing letters according to a certain sequence. And as you can see, one of the publishing houses prepared this material that you can see on the screen, and there are 11 big stages. And if you want to calculate all smaller elements appearing within these stages, there are more than 30. Every letter is introduced in the same way, and the introduction of all the letters of the alphabet takes more than one term, like time to February, March in the first grade, since the beginning of the school year. So in this method, there are so many limitations. And its creators do not recommend to introduce the words which pronunciation differs than the way they are written down, or we should not introduce like words including I, the letter I, within them, and the rule is that a student should read and write only words composed of the letters that they've already learned. Think about a child with the name like Wawrzyniec or Łukasz. He will have an official consent to write down their name after several weeks of learning. So I'm talking about children with complicated names. I'm exaggerating just a little bit, but in this method, the sequence of introduction of new letters is very important. Not all the textbooks follow these guidelines 100%. So very often there are many mistakes, discrepancies, which are then translated into the later stages of this process of teaching reading. But it is not the focus of my presentation here. As a result of all these limitations of this methods are technical texts. Actually, we have textbooks that during the first term, there is nothing else but texts like the one that you can see in this slide or similar to that one. I usually begin my classes with students about reading from an attempt to read out this text. It's very difficult because, well, it is difficult to read because you are exposed to certain letters, to certain sounds. It is not very cohesive in terms of content, and pupils are supposed to read texts like that for several first weeks at school. So we can see certain weaknesses of the synthetical analytical method. And here, several years of experience of writing reviews on textbooks on my part, and it meant analyzing these textbooks for the purpose of my research as well, allowed me to notice these weaknesses, and very often we tend not to notice them because we've been working with these textbooks for years, and every teacher remembers from that school that yes, we had been taught like that, so we had learned like that. Many primers focus on learning how to read. Well, they focus only on the technical aspect. It is a very absorbing process, difficult for pupils, so there is not much time left to organize like story time. It is not part of the curriculum. We do not have sufficient number of hours a day, and many primers, many textbooks for the first grade includes only like very simplified texts, not contributing anything significant to the lives of students or pupils. And even first graders have a lot of knowledge of life of the world nowadays in certain areas of interest. So these texts are simply boring for them. Some texts propose texts only by several authors, like the authors of the textbook. And sometimes there are poems. And a great expert on didactics doesn't have to be a talented poet. So these poems sometimes are of poor quality. Some textbooks are not very aesthetic from this graphical point of view, and in previous presentations you could see it is very important to give diverse material to children also in terms of graphics. So if we think that learning a new skill, which is often connected with many difficulties and obstacles, requires strong internal motivation, overcoming difficulties and challenges. Think about the situation that you have boring texts, which are difficult, not interesting. It does not contribute to enhancing internal motivation. As a result, we can see declining motivation to read among pupils. So pupils in the fourth grade have the attitude towards reading, well, we are learning about these attitudes from a research which was referred to by the director opening our webinar. So declining interest, lesser motivation. It is the result of working with uninteresting and not very diverse sources. Among the proposals I would like to address in the second part of my presentation, we will not have the ones departing, full departure from current approach. It is not a revolution. It is an idea to supplement this old method, adding more elements, and in time, if we see whether additional elements work or how they work, perhaps there should be more of them, or they should become the majority or a vast part of this methodology, and perhaps in the future it will be a more balanced literacy method. We do not have a proper Polish phrase for that, so we use the phrase balanced literacy, and perhaps it will become the leading methodology to teach reading at schools. The first factor is space. If we apply different forms and methods of working while teaching how to read, well, the space requires various elements, changing a workstation, workplace. It is not the change requiring a lot of expenditure, a lot of money. No, it is about changing habits that we have acquired during our own learning path. Because I'm sure you remember the classroom like that. And when you take your students around the school building, students, I mean college students, we can see classrooms like that at the initial stages of education. So college students becoming teachers see classrooms like that. But it is very important to change the space. You can see an example of one of participants of our meeting, Iwona Pietrzak-Płachta, who redesigned the space of the school library, changing the way of thinking about the significance of this place at school, and thinking about what may happen in the library and how can it contribute to enhancing competences of students. When we think about resources, we have to take care of reading material focused on the content, not only practicing techniques. They have to be diverse in terms of the content and graphically as well, so that you have proposals for various students, various pupils at different stages of their learning process. People learn at different pace, so sometimes at the beginning of the first grade, there are pupils who just learn first letters, but there are also the ones who are quite fluent at reading and they can read quite a big book. So for these pupils, it is absolutely necessary to go through various stages, well, at a different pace, because otherwise children are discouraged to read at all. In our classroom, there are also students with special needs, and the pace of learning how to read is much slower. They need to remain at a slightly lower stage for a bit longer to have these skills better developed, and very often later on they will accelerate, but they need space at the beginning to work a bit more so that the pace of learning is adjusted to their needs. So the resources that we offer in teaching to read should be a proposal for pupils of different interests, for girls, for boys, for pupils with special educational needs, for pupils of special interests, because sometimes there are students at the spectrum of autism. You saw a presentation by Monica Smith. It might be a very simple language, but in terms of content, they may address different elements of reality, encouraging to participate in a certain interesting experience. Elements of humor might appear there. And then there are different habits and different likes and dislikes aesthetically as well, because you cannot debate that. You may like a different kind of illustrations, graphic elements, font. So diversity is very much recommended here. But especially we need to have books at the right level of difficulty, and that is why it is very important job. I'm thinking about that in the context of future core curriculum, which is now being prepared, is to prepare some standards, as Monica Smith has mentioned, defining consecutive levels of difficulty of the text, so that you can accompany pupils in developing their reading skills and not only proposing to them one option, one reading material, like one size fits all. And resources like that were created. There were some attempts to do that in the 1990s. And here you can see one attempt like that. Unfortunately, the attempt failed. Maybe it started too early, maybe teachers were not ready, but it showed that it is quite possible to suggest to students and to offer them books like the ones we could see in previous presentations, but in the Polish language. So a child beginning to learn how to read reads, but has many illustrations which are big, they precede, they are earlier than the text, and they show elements that will appear in the text. So as you can see in all these illustrations, you can see objects or words, which in the textbook for the first grade would not appear for sure, like bee, spider, teddy bear. But it is not a problem for a child to recognize the object in the illustration, pronounce the words, remembering how it is written down.
And a child who reads like this gets immediate satisfaction from being able to read on his or her own, thus developing his or her agency in reading. They know that they can read independently. Obviously, the teacher would picks the suggestions, the resources to make that possible. This is one of the slides. There is always an amusing illustration at the end, and at this very first level we can see that this humor and some literary experience is possible. Now, the benefits from extending the range of methods and tools in reading that was mentioned in the presentations of Alison and Monica. I will only summarize that because of time constraints. We can differentiate the pace of learning to read, including children with special needs, and there is an increasing number of these, and each teacher sees how difficult it is to follow recommendations from counseling centers, psychological counseling centers, where there are quite a number of such students in a class, and I'm mentioning my own experience as well. That also involves developing inner motivation to read and this sense of agency in that regard. Using new tools, book resources which are adapted to match the individual needs of students. We abandon competition in favor of developing cooperation, reading in groups, reading in pairs. These are all activities or classes which enhance cooperation in a team or teamwork and make it impossible for pupils to compare their skills between themselves. There is also an opportunity to see reading as a way of getting information about the world and literary experience, and these are two key objectives of getting in touch with written text for both children and adults. So the earlier a young reader sees that opportunity, the stronger his or her motivation will be to overcome any potential problems. Using a wide variety of school books for children, books for children, and various forms of activities makes it possible for us to refer to various values. It's hard to talk about values when you read about shoes that Beata has, as we saw the example. We also develop a community in class and surrounding activities like reading clubs, voluntary activities. For a number of years myself, I went with my pupils to local libraries or kindergartens, and my students were reading to children in preschools or kindergartens, and this is how they integrated as well. So reading as a social activity, the possibility to have various educational activities through the use of books. We've got social education, education in terms of nature, mathematics, technical skills, reading instructions and text about mathematics. We've got a number of resources and I'm glad to share these with you if you like. And something that it's worth to talk about, because I'm now engaged in developing resources for the curriculum abroad as well. We can use these resources and these tools for children learning Polish abroad, bilingual children as well. And to conclude, I'd like to show you an image from my school where we abandoned the analytical and synthetic method. Children do not use the ABC books, but they use a variety of sources adapted in terms of the difficulty to the speed of work. And this is what it is like when you work from home, and you probably experience that as well. Most students who work at their own pace read and write quite smoothly and spend breaks with books. And you can see a reading marathon here where students were reading to their younger colleagues. And that's something that develops a community as well. And that shows that book is something very important at school. Thank you very much. And I do encourage you to ask questions either now or after the seminar. I'm at your disposal.
Dziękujemy serdecznie.
Thank you,
Dr.
Dobkowska. That was a very interesting presentation on how we are introducing these methods in Poland as well. I can't see any questions from you on the chat, so it seems everything was clear. There is a comment that there are not enough materials for Polish schools, that is abroad. We are working on that, and we hope that perhaps preparing new materials with the new approach, a new opening to the teaching of reading will prepare materials which will be universal also for Polish schools abroad. So we'll be following information. Thank you. Thank you very much again. And we've got last presentation. It's a shame because it's very interesting to listen. A presentation by Dr. Kinga Białek, who has authored a book about theory and practice of argumentative reading. Dr. Białek is a teacher of Polish and Hebrew, and she's been working in schools, and now Polish and American Foundation of Liberty, and she's a tutor as well. Doctor, the floor is yours. In search for a lost connection, how to accompany students in finding relations with texts of culture, various emotions. Thank you very much for this introduction. This is a great pleasure to be with you today.
Bardzo interesujących prezentacji. Jestem ostatnia, więc wydaje mi się,
I'm the last one, so
wiele ważnych myśli zostało już powiedzianych. Nie wiem, czy bardzo wzbogacę
I think a lot has already been said, and I'm not sure whether I will enrich our contributions here, but I can see that I can see this connection between what we are talking about and how we see the need to support reading in school. And I wish to thank Dr. Joanna Dobkowska for her presentation, because we've got these words which are most important, that reading at school is not only fiction, but also reading texts relating to learning about the world, mathematical education as well. And I'm smiling at the organizers. We are going to have a webinar, seminar, another event maybe on what we refer to as discipline literacy, that is reading scientific texts. This is a space where reflections can be shared. I'm going to talk about looking for the lost connection, or in search for a lost connection. The theme of reading, which we know That's something really important. We all believe here that reading is a key ability. I do believe as well that this is the least expensive and most effective method of developing skills available to anyone, because it links to the positive work at school, and positive consequences of supporting reading are really rocketing, we could say. If we look at meta-analysis, that's one of the most effective methods relating to the educational effects. I would like to focus today on three elements.
Może inną troszkę perspektywą czytelnictwa w szkole.
Yet another perspective. We could perhaps look at the practice of reading at lessons of Polish in more senior grades. I'm working on grades 4-8 and also in secondary general schools, and I work with future teachers and experienced teachers as well. And a task that we set for ourselves is looking for methods of work in conditions we have, in the realities we are facing, so that supporting of reading and developing reading competences. I would like to talk about that, methods and techniques which can help improve the quality of learning, leading to cognition competence and developing the joy of life, good life, that is a pleasure for us.
Let me begin with a certain metaphor that we use. It is a metaphor of a reading ecosystem. When I've heard about it for the first time, and it was at a lecture by Helene Beers. She's an educator supporting development of reading in the US, and to all of us, all the teachers gathered in a huge lecture hall, she asked a question. Could you think about your pathway to reading? Think about an ecosystem that brought you up. Think about people who influenced your reading, like teachers, parents, siblings, friends. Think about resources, like very material resources, thanks to which you could develop as a reader. And just like every living body, every living creature, we create ecosystems. So we can think about development of reading using this idea of ecosystem, because there might be supporting ecosystems and non-supportive ecosystems. So if we think about the reading ecosystem, think about biocenosis, so a set of living organisms. So everyone, all the people influencing reading education, reading practices, or people who just read around us, who provide us with access to books. And when I say books, I do not mean only a belles lettres, but I'm thinking about different texts that we can read, a republic of texts that we can enter. But the very existence of supportive ecosystem, supportive environment of people around us is not sufficient to have this permanent reading habit, because we tend to forget about this aspect, because it is also very important that biotope, as biologists would say it, so non-living elements of our environment. Think about a young reader. Does he or she have an easy access to books? If they feel a need to read, is it easy for them to obtain a book, to have access to a book? Maybe they live far away from the library building. Do they have a library at home? Does he have friends who will lend him or her a book? These are additional questions when we are thinking about developing reading competences. Is it true that students and pupils with whom we work have this good supportive reading ecosystem? When I'm talking about that, usually I use this metaphor working with teachers, and when I ask this question to them, start about your path to reading. Think back about your early reading experiences. Why do you read? Why is it an important part of your life? Who had influence on you? What happened at the beginning? And then I ask these teachers with whom I work to ask the same question in their mind to their students. Do they know anything about the students' experiences and what experiences, early experiences of the students? What are the reading ecosystems? When we have this diagnosis, I share the results of studies from a few years ago, which were shocking to me, which were about some statistics like 20% or up to 20% young people up to 16 years of age did not see a single adult reading a book in their close environment. They haven't met a person for whom reading was an everyday experience, a matter of a habit, something regular, typical, normal, everyday. So, in many cases, if you analyze reading ecosystems of our students and pupils, we may come up with a diagnosis that perhaps they do not have supportive and conducive ecosystems. Maybe their families wouldn't have a very positive influence on shaping these reading habits or on shaping reading strategies. That is why we can see that in such cases, a school has even a bigger role. Because if we build reading communities at schools, well, I'm repeating some ideas after previous speakers, but I believe this message is of tremendous importance. So we need to reiterate it. Because then it will become very obvious, it will become a part of the social consensus that a school must be an ecosystem conducive to reading. It is our responsibility of the headmaster, teachers, all of them, so that these ecosystems are designed in such a way that they have a positive impact on reading among young people. When I'm thinking about ecosystems, I'm not pushing away responsibility only to put them on shoulders of teachers. No, that's not the point. Zagta Dobkowska was showing you examples of some volunteer work, actions, events organized at schools. Now and then they work very well. They also contribute to building this reading community, but I'm talking about something even simpler. Like putting a book on the desk as a teacher while conducting a lesson so that a book, the text, is simply present in the classroom, in everyday experience of our students. It is really important, and if we assume that a school has a very important task of removing inequality in educational opportunities, or, well, there are sometimes pupils coming to school from underprivileged environments or with lower level of social and economic status or cultural status. If they come to school, they get this opportunity to catch up, we hope that the school will address the difficulties, and then reading is among the most efficient ways to give more equal opportunities or equal opportunities or handling inequalities in educational terms. We know that not reading is a factor or a measure or a factor pointing us in the direction of a lower socioeconomic status. And usually it is inherited. As a rule, it is inherited. And if there is a child, if there is a pupil during a school education, and if they learn this habit of reading, they will increase their educational opportunities. It will be passed on to next generations. If it does not happen, the next generation will inherit that and they will pass on their educational difficulties. And there is an old, well-known wording or phrase on the basis of a certain analysis, St. Matthew effect in the reading. So reading competences are subject to St. Matthew effect. If you have just very few, well, as the Bible says, if you have a lot, you will receive even more, and if you have few, it will be even taken away from you. Well, yes, so increasing competences, enhancing competences, it is not easy, but we have to start with a diagnosis of needs, and then to respond to the needs of individual children, individual pupils, because it is one of the most efficient levers of social development. And now I'm beginning to use lofty words, lofty phrases, talking about values, but I actually think if we, as the system, have a tool which is really helpful, we have to use it. We have to use it, otherwise it would be a waste. So regardless of an educational level, whether it is like beginners in reading, people or pupils who read, who learn how to read and these are initial stages, or if we talk about older students, well, all of them require some support in developing various competences, for example, in interpreting the text, understanding the text, and we'll get a great return on this investment. All of us, actually. And now I'm thinking that we are talking about a huge role of educational research, which shows that there are really good, successful, efficient methods and techniques. On the other hand, we should still remember about a certain tradition of educational theories, which can be very helpful as well in focusing our attention on the essential things, on setting up educational goals. And look back at the last 100 years of history of teaching, of educational concepts. All of the authors which were important there were talking about the essential role of reading for social development, precisely for that, for improving quality of life, and for developing reading competences. They talk about developing of reading competences as the most important factor among the most important factors multiplying educational outcomes. So these beliefs, these convictions were the most important thing in our project. We wanted to take advantage of the knowledge on what is important in education, on how to teach, to create a model of working with the text that is available to every teacher and gives them efficiency of the activities and within such a reality that we have at schools, because our project was only for teachers of the Polish language in Polish schools. So we needed to take into account difficulties or challenges connected with the core curriculum which is still in place in Polish schools, which, let me put it like that, was not conducive to developing reading for pleasure. It was not conducive to developing the reading skills at all, because there was not sufficient amount of time for that, to focus on reading competences, and so on and so forth. The most important items or starting points in looking and designing these methods were three pillars that you can see. Cognitive theories is number one. I like Daniel Willingham, who is an expert on supporting reading. One of the most famous books by him is How to Bring Up a Child Who Reads. Rough translation back into English, sorry. So his ideas were very close to my heart when he wrote that critical thinking or competences like that cannot be implemented in the abstract space. So when we think about development of reading competences, it happens always in the context of a certain text, literary work with which we are going to work, so that students' thinking is rooted in something very specific. So from specific to the abstract, and the next pillar were concepts connected with critical literacy.
Now, critical literacy is reading, trying to help us answer the question who we are, to understand what social mechanisms determine our place in culture, how to diagnose the culture we live in, how to diagnose myths, false concepts, to get liberated from certain stereotypes and limitations, and through reading competences to go to emancipation. And that was presented by Paulo Freire, working with adults. But this idea was transferred to schools. And the third pillar, this is what we know about teaching, good experience which supports the development of skills, which helps pupils with different levels of competence to develop, to gain experience, for their school experience to be an experience of effective development. So a typical situation in a school which we observed before we started the project was to diagnose the situation at school, how we read things. And what I mean is lessons of Polish. I'm a Polish teacher, so this is my experience, most important to me. Usually, this pattern is the same. The teacher agrees with the class, well, you've got 1 month to read whatever, Pinocchio, or Pan Tadeusz, Polish national poem, or any other novel. And we agree, assuming that students will read that at home a month. From then we meet at school, and there are something like 2 weeks of talking about the book, assuming that students will be interpreting the text, and that ends with writing an essay or a text inspired by the book they've read about further lives of the protagonists. So teachers, me included, we've been working along these lines for many years, and we all had that impression, ourselves observing that, and teachers working with us, that this is not effective, it's not working, because at different stages of this process, something did not really work. We diagnosed that. When I talk about reading being blocked in a way, we often worked analyzing the experience of students who did not have any specific difficulties relating to reading. They were not dyslexic or dysgraphic. The reading skills were average, and we diagnosed 4 items. Children or students do not read. Whatever time they have for that, it does not really happen that they come having read the book. Many of them do not open really the book. So that's the first blocking element. The other one is they read but they do not remember. That motivated by parents is not an experience of understanding the text. Something has been done, but ineffectively. Third difficulty at a different level is that students have read it, can answer questions about the plot, what happened, what the protagonists are, but they do not draw conclusions. They remain in their sphere of thinking, saying that Quo Vadis is a story of different protagonists and a love story and persecution of Christians. They do not have the skill of going into the abstract and interpret what happened. There are different groups, other groups of students for whom the reading competences are highly developed, being able to interpret the text, but they cannot use them to write a text. Having diagnosed these blocking factors, we tried to find an answer to the question how to make it work.
Różne etapy tego założonego procesu, tak jak mówię, naszym celem nie było.
Our aim was not to revolutionize the thinking about reading. Our task was to make these lessons effective, to offer an opportunity to develop reading competences. So it starts when a teacher thinks about her or his work. They need to presume that it's equally important what's going on at home and at school. We cannot read a big novel together. So some of the process will happen beyond the classroom. So this experience has to be planned for the pupils, for the students. One of the reasons why students are blocked when trying to open the book, they do not know how to organize the reading. They are scared by thinking itself about reading 200 pages of a novel. Many young readers have a problem organizing the reading. In Polish context, students do not know how to arrange time for the reading. So one of our tasks is to segment that. We read it in bits. It's not 45 minutes at school, but 10 minutes. Where are you? What have you learned? Whether you understand what has happened. And we emphasize the need of note-taking. And this is something which is forgotten, something that has to be developed. There is no good reading without that, and that's interconnected. We need to have these skills connected. We are trying to plan lessons so that most of the time spent in the classroom, which is precious, to focus on what is really important and difficult. This is the key element, and that requires the teacher's support. We don't want the lesson time not to be wasted, to focus on what is really important, who went where and what they did, but for pupils to focus on the interpretation. Something that makes this program stand out, the program we've been working on for 4 years, and more teachers are introducing elements of this program. I haven't counted that recently, but it seems that it's nearly 800 students or pupils are working along these lines, in part at least one reading item semester. The distinguishing features are these 4 values for pupils to become increasingly independent by repeating these skills like a spiral. And we are delegating responsibility to pupils for understanding as well, linking to life as well, because that reader's response is a true response from the depth of their hearts, rather than an essay written during the exam. Just between ourselves here, I still have this dilemma at the back of my head, whether certain things were happening. There are some dilemmas which make me spend sleepless nights, how to live, rather than focusing on the actual plot. Without giving our pupils this chance for these true dilemmas, we deprive them of the chance for true thinking. Here you can see a pattern, how to work with one book. On Fridays, 15 minutes in the classroom for children to show their notes in their notebooks. They talk about what they read, what was difficult or unclear. And this is in a nutshell, how to continue, what to look at when you read the next portion of the text. So the teacher supports the children. They are not left on their own. We eliminate this feeling of sense of being helpless, because we reduce the number of pages as well. Also, we help pupils concentrate on what is important, because whatever is going on working with the book at school, this is something we'll be using in the classroom. What we really want to have after a book is read, how to deepen the interpretation, profound understanding of the text, work with more profound analysis, looking for conclusions going beyond the text, which talk not only about the story of the main heroes, protagonists, but well, you've experienced, you've encountered them, and how will you use that? How will you take it on from here? What we also want is to have elements of critical interpretation, and this is the last moment. Look at these questions at a high taxonomic level, provided that pupils have this foundation in the form of meaningful details. We designed our work with the book to be read at home, so that it's not empty scanning. It's to make it reading for pleasure, intellectual pleasure as well, following from the understanding of something. Such reading has to be an element of visible teaching. I'm teaching my pupils how to do it. And that was mentioned today when we talked about modeling and the shaping of reading competences. I'm showing how this works because I want them to be developing. One of the components is looking for meaningful details, not to omitting them, thinking about them. When I've got a lot of these meaningful details, when I've got an interpretation in my mind, when a teacher or my colleague asks me, well, yes, true, we are talking about love conquers all. This is the concluding note in Quo Vadis. But is that really the case? Really? Is it worthwhile to
czy właściwie z punktu widzenia dzisiejszego świata to takie przesłanie jest prawdziwe, nieprawdziwe?
sacrifice so much? Is it true or not now when I'm ready myself to challenge my own conclusions? I do not accept the first answer. Only then can I develop my world of values, which are not repeated. Values are there when I think about them, when I really wonder how to apply these in a situation of a true, authentic dilemma.
It is the level of critical questions that we want to take our pupils to, so they are not satisfied with simple answers. Like, it is a beautiful short story which says that we have to help the poor. No, you need to ask additional questions. Why the mother of this daughter, who is the protagonist of the short story, doesn't speak up at all? Why is it only a male lawyer who speaks up? Even though, well, we should give the voice to women in this story. Additional questions like that. We want our pupils to answer additional questions and ask additional questions to themselves. Is the vision presented in this book just, fair, reasonable, useful? If the answer is yes, it is fair, good, just, in line with our values, then we want these answers to flow from the real intellectual, in-depth process of searching for meaning. Because we are aware that it is not simple and requires a certain community of readers who will be willing to share their experiences. I, as the teacher, I am just a bit more experienced reader. I'm not a giver of knowledge. It is difficult for many teachers. I'm talking on the basis of my experience, especially difficult to teachers of the Polish language, because we often like to have the last word. And this project is about the dethronement of the teacher as a reader. A teacher is just another reader, maybe with a bit more experience, maybe I know some techniques, I have methodology, but I don't have the monopoly for truth. I do not have the monopoly for understanding the text. It is very difficult. On the other hand, it requires a lot of courage, because students may say different things that we disagree with, which require discussion, which are controversial, but it is a real process of reading. Because here I'm going back to the beginning of my presentation. A real reading pleasure. Oh, let me use a different analogy. We can have different pleasures, and a pleasure of reading has many similarities to the pleasure of eating. Sometimes it is pleasant for us to have something simple, fast food, like let's grab a hamburger, and eating it gives us pleasure. But there is also a different kind of culinary pleasure, resulting from the fact that we enjoy tasting something sophisticated, surrounded by a special atmosphere. Then it is a different kind of pleasure. It is also the pleasure. I'm not trying to be judgmental, better, worse. We have to experience different things to be happy. The same goes for books. I am not ashamed of these things any longer. Sometimes I have a lot of pleasure that I derive from reading horror books, crime stories. Sometimes I need something of beautiful form, highly avant-garde. And the same is true for our students. They need to get the skills from us to develop skills of reading in order to enjoy freedom resulting from reading books. I can show some examples to you, examples of answers given by pupils
wyprodukowali dzięki pracy z lekturą, to są to, co widzą Państwo tutaj,
These are
to są
examples of
wypowiedzi
answers
tych,
of
którzy
pupils of
w
eighth
czasie
grade
najwcześniej przed pracą w ten
who,
sposób
at the beginning
oceniali
of the
dwa A3 z
project,
języka polskiego, różne
were
języki na
receiving
miarę,
grades like
ale
satisfactory,
nie
but they
deklarowali,
were
że język
not
polski czy czytanie to są ich
fans of the
ulubione,
Polish language classes. They did not
ulubione
enjoy reading at the
czynności,
beginning of the
a
project,
jednak
but
czytali,
in
pogłębiali swoje
time
rozumienie i
it became
stało się to
part of
częścią
their
ich
everyday experience.
codziennego doświadczenia.
I know I've been
Bardzo
talking for
dziękuję,
too long,
bardzo
so that's all
miło.
from me. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Dziękujemy serdecznie. Myślę, że nic się nie
In
stało
the
w tym
chat,
czasie równolegle
there were many
do
comments,
komentarzy
remarks.
do pani
There was a
wystąpienia pojawiła
discussion
się taka dyskusja
around the
dotycząca
role of a school
roli
library
biblioteki
as the
szkolnej jako takiego
first place
pierwszego
of
miejsca
contact with
kontaktu
the
z
book
książką,
and of special
szczególnie powiedziałbym się tyle
responsibility
w związku z tym
for
ciąży na
school
szkolnych
librarians.
bibliotekarzach i
And
bibliotekarkach.
obviously, a
No i
discussion
oczywiście
about
wyzwania związane
challenges
z
connected with buying
zapytywaniem
books,
pozycji, ale też z
but
pozycjami opatrzonymi
also
opracowaniem, tak?
about books with
Także
some
dla
remarks,
klasy drugiej szkoły
explanations,
podstawowej.
asterisks. And there was a
Pojawiło się
question
pytanie o
about
książkę
Daniel
Daniela
Willingham,
Willinghama i pojawiła się
Willingham's
też
book title. So
odpowiedź,
is it
jeśli się nie mylę,
Raising
to był
Kids Who
Raising
Read?
Kids Who
Yes, that's
Read.
precisely
Tak, to jest
this
ta
book. I
książka.
can show
Mam ją
it
na
to
półce,
you.
mogę
It is on my
pokazać zaraz,
bookshelf.
jeśli trzeba.
Obawiam się,
There
że nie ma
is no
tłumaczenia.
translation into
Nie,
Polish.
nie ma.
No Polish version
Niestety,
yet.
ale
No,
duże
unfortunately
fragmenty,
not. But many
książki,
chapters of
rozdziałów
this
są
book are
dostępne w
available on the
internecie i
internet,
można
so you may
próbować
try to use
wykorzystać
chats,
i
AI
inne
tools
narzędzia AI,
for
które
like
coraz
machine
lepiej tłumaczą
translation for shorter
takie
bits of
krótsze
the
teksty,
text.
więc
So you may
można
give it a
spróbować.
try. There is
Jest też
a
prośba o
request
kontakt do pani
for your
mailowy, tak jak
email.
było na
I
slajdzie.
guess there was your
Dzięki temu
email
mogła pani
on the
albo
slide.
podać na
So
czacie,
please show us
albo,
the last slide if you can, or enter
albo
it
nam
in the
wyświetlić.
chat.
W każdym razie
So many words of
bardzo dużo
praise and
pochwał
thank yous
pod
for you. So
pani adresem.
in the
Tutaj
chat,
już na czacie pani doktor
this
wrzuciła
email address was entered.
k.bialek@szkolaedukacji.pl.
Have a look
Mam
at the
nadzieję, że
chat
państwo to
box.
widzicie na
Many
czacie.
thanks
Ja też dziękuję
both
pani
to
i
you,
wszystkim
all the other
prowadzącym
speakers during today's
dzisiejsze
webinar.
wykłady. Panie
Excellent experts,
wspaniałe
highly
wykłady dacie, bardzo
interesting
ciekawe.
topic,
Myślę, że
highly interesting
dla nas w
content
Instytucie
in
Badań
our
Edukacyjnych
Educational
Polskiej, że
Research Institute
przygotowujemy
because we are
profil
preparing a profile of the
absolwenta,
graduate.
to te
These
informacje
remarks,
tego księgowego
conclusions,
są też bardzo
findings are
wartościowe.
extremely valuable. So
I tutaj
perhaps
jeszcze
two
też mi
more
wybierzecie
things
jakąś z
to
tymi
wrap it
na,
up.
na zakończenie,
Graduate
że
profile we are
profil
working
księgowy
on, we
akurat
started
przygotowujemy
that
od
last
kwietnia,
April, is
jest
almost
na
completed. I mean,
ukończeniu,
it
w tym
has been
sensie, że został
prepared, it was
przygotowany, został
consulted
skonsultowany, przepuszczony
and
przez,
passed
brzydko
through
mówiąc,
that
przepuszczony
phase of
przez
social
konsultacje społeczne, ale
consultations.
myślę,
And I
że
guess there
tak
was
z
like
1500
1,500
głosów summa
opinions on
summarum
that,
zebraliśmy.
if I remember
Jeżeli
correctly the
dobrze
number.
liczę,
Various
w
formulas,
różnej formie. To były
contributions
wypowiedzieli na
in
spotkaniach i
meetings,
przesłane do nas bezpośrednio
emails, or
mailowo przez
information
formularze
via
w
forms,
formie głosów ze spotkań
opinions
organizowanych
in
przez
different
Polsat, więc Stocznia dla
places,
nas
organized
realizowała.
sometimes
Także
by the Stocznia
sprawozdanie
or in
z
other
konsultacji
places. So we'll receive
dostaniemy
a report from the consultation phase.
prawdopodobnie
It will be
lada
ready
moment
very soon,
i
and
będziemy
on this
na tej
basis, by the
podstawie do
end of
końca
the
roku
year, we'll improve this
poprawiać profil
profile
absolwenta
of the graduates,
i
and we'll
przekazywać go
pass
do
it on to the
Ministerstwa
Ministry
Edukacji
of National
Narodowej.
Education. We're
Wciąż
still organizing
organizujemy
webinars
spotkania
like the one
webinarowe,
today.
takie jak dzisiejsze,
And
a
since we are
także znowu
talking
mówiliśmy o
about Daniel Willingham, who will be
Danielu
the
będzie
guest
on gościem naszego
of our
webinaru za
webinar
12
in
dni,
12
20
days. There
listopada.
will be the
Organizujemy webinar
webinar
dotyczący
about
Knowledge Rich
the
Curriculum, czyli
curriculum.
jak pozwoliliśmy to sobie przetłumaczyć na polski, kompetencje
So there
oparte
will
na
be
wiedzy w
he will
podstawach
be our
programowych.
guest, and
I tam
Daniel
Daniel Willingham
Willingham,
razem z
Tim
Timem
Oates
Oatesem z Cambridge,
from
Nuno Cato,
Cambridge,
byłym
and
ministrem edukacji i
former
szkolnictwa
Minister
wyższego
of
i nauki
Education of
Portugalii,
Portugal, will
będą
be
mieli
our guest and will
przyjemność
tell us more
mówić właśnie o
about
podstawach wiedzowych
critical
myślenia.
thinking. And Maria
Podstawie.
de
Pani Maria,
Skur
też
is
sobie jeszcze
raising her
poprosiłam
hand.
i
I
myślę,
just
że chciałaby
wanted to
Bo
pani
jak
say
coś
that
sobie
here we
będziemy
should
teraz
have a
powoli właśnie pogadać o
conversation
tym, czy warto
whether
wszystko
love
naościć,
conquers
czy nie,
all and what's the limit of
co
sacrifices
powiedziała,
in
co
the
zaczęłaś,
name
co
of love.
jak
I wanted to
mam
be fully
gotowa.
engaged in this
Okej? Tylko
discussion as
tak.
a reader and start
No tak, tak.
discussing these
Okej.
things So yes, we would definitely need a separate session for that, because here we are sharing theories. We need to feel it. Book clubs for adults. There are places like that. That's great, because then we would be able to have a real conversation about books. Yes, it is one of remarks that appeared in the chat. No, sorry, in this Q&A part. One of the participants wrote that actually it makes sense to read on your own, to pass on the competencies to other people. I guess it was Kinga who was talking about that. Like, makes sense for a literary text to appear at least on the desk of the teacher. I read as a teacher. I read books. That's normal for me. I do it on everyday basis, because it is difficult to pass on the love of reading if you don't do that, if you prefer watching films. Yes, it is very difficult to attain, that's true. We have to maintain the contact, or like like read new books for children and so on. I'm thinking about something else as well. Other media, other paper media, like graphic novels or comic books, because there are so many comic books which are not necessarily without any text. They are based on text to a large degree, but there are also other comic books where there is no text. There could be an interesting starting point for a discussion about writing, reading, inspiration, for writing something on your own, or starting point for interpretation by children. Tutaj Iwona Pietrzak-Płachta was writing in the chat about picture books. It is a good starting point for little children, but there are also picture books for adults. Comic books, graphic novels, different options here, whatever we focus on. It is a fantastic tool to build things that Kinga was discussing. And then sometimes we feel like eating something more sophisticated. So these are the choices that you may have. So you may feel like doing different things. I would say that the school could give a chance to taste all of these options, because sometimes you use a spoon, sometimes you use a fork to eat a meal. So you need to get the tools to do things, to understand different kinds of books, and to derive the blah, blah, blah. I love picture books. Let me put it like that. I love picture books. I really do. But in the States, in Boston, Fountain Spinell in Boston assumes that we'll introduce children into the world of literature through picture books. Some of them are really important, serious, the ones that even adults should read them or have a look at them, because they are very interesting in cognitive terms. I love not only literature, but also comic books. I fully agree with your statements. There is also a question in the chat about the phenomenon, if I can call it like that, the phenomenon of young adult literature. I guess I know what your answers will be, but what do you think about that? I participated in 3-4 big panels about that. And first of all, I'm a proponent of any bans here. Sorry, I'm against any bans here, but I'm a proponent of building this approach. A young person has their own mind. If they read about some bad behavior, it does not mean they will do that. If we are afraid that they will do that, or read the book on your own as an adult and start a conversation with the young reader. What was the interesting part of this book for you? Because it is not my world, so what captured your attention? Then you can learn so much. Now, young adults have this grading like 16 up to 18. If it is a kid of 10, maybe it is a good idea to encourage the child to read something else without introducing any bans. like with everything else. Oh, well, maybe in a moment. Now, perhaps you should focus on something else. That's the book which is quite similar, but perhaps it is like a great book for you now. Like Astrid Lindgren's books about coming-of-age stories. Well, that's a very brief answer, perhaps, but a very spontaneous answer, because quite recently I had conversations around.
Dzięki.
Thank you. Kinga wants to add something. Just quickly, two things. I've confiscated a book, my 10-year-old, not matching her age, but I do understand that need. And the problem, literature for children and young adults is avoiding difficult, controversial themes. Sometimes children have this feeling that they are being cheated. They are ready to read about things. They don't want fiction, pretending. So that's maybe the phenomenon. And I'll share one thing with you. I was 12 when my mother's neighbor brought a book which was not intended for me. Sort of, I was reading that all night, conspiring with a local library. I survived. I'm an active reader, a Polish teacher, and I'm reading books of this type. Proust as well can survive, but it's proven that if a reader below the age of 15 finds something that attracts him or her, waiting impatiently for another volume, that there is a high chance that will save the reader after he or she is 15. Serious, yes, different themes. So it's, well, this term of young adult is not really very precise what it really means. There are various items, various books, and there is a whole series of warriors about cats. And there are two terms. Abandonment is bad, and it's bad to kill, evil to kill. Abandonment, we say, well, read whatever you like, we say to our child. The killing means, no, you are not allowed to read it, so you have to find a place somewhere in between, get in touch with the reality. So that's maybe a super moment to get into a conversation. Extremes are not good. There was yet another question, request for the name of the researcher. I sent that, sent a link. This is Fundacja Spinel research. It's a couple. I don't know whether they are working on that themselves or whether they delegated that to the associates. There is a whole institute supporting literacy. You can see a link to the website. It's not picture books only. They are doing all sorts of things. Thank you. We could have a panel on this fascinating topic, a discussion panel, not only presentations. Our time is up already, and time which you have booked for this meeting, even though we've got 260 plus people here. That's very good. We'll continue. That's a second meeting on reading organized together with the foundation. We hope to continue this fruitful cooperation. As I've mentioned, feel invited the 20th of November, our webinar on knowledge and thinking. We do not have a recruitment page yet. Today or Tuesday, it will be there. Have Daniel Willingham. You can ask him on the chat about the book. And I wish to thank you all, the speakers today. It was excellent to listen to you. I'm hoping for more. And my thanks to all participants, the ones who have commented. We are glad as the Institute to be able to offer something so fascinating. Thank you. Thank you all. So thank you very much.